Story 1.
My husband caught me cheating, exposed my affair, and forced me to face the cycle of infidelity. Why am I driving to my mother's house at 11 at night in the pouring rain? Why are my husband and children safe and dry at home, probably already asleep in their beds? Why did Bradley threaten to divorce me? I haven't even done anything. What the heck is going on? Why won't anybody talk to me? My name is Emma Smith, except professionally I go by my maiden name Johnson. My husband, Brad, never had a problem with that. He understood how important it was to me that I earned my degrees and certifications in clinical psychology under my own name before we got married. He was always supportive, and that's why we didn't have the ceremony until I was 26. That day, just over 9 years ago, was probably the happiest day of my life. We had the perfect wedding, not too big, not too small, and all of our families were there. My father, Jim, is an amazing dancer. He'd been taking lessons for something like 15 years. That's how he met his wife, Grace. Technically, she's my stepmom, but I was already 17 when they first met, so she didn't have a hand in raising me. My mother, Linda, was also there with her fourth husband, Glenn. Having them all together at the wedding was a major feat of diplomacy, but it went smoothly. I even saw Mom sitting at a table with Dad and Grace while I was dancing with Bradley after the father-daughter dance. We wanted to start our family right away since we'd waited to get married. Brillin is 8 and Caden is 6, a girl and a boy, 2 years apart, just like me and my younger brother Tommy. I know it's silly, but it makes me feel like I accomplished everything correctly. They're at home now and I'm not. I should go back. I don't know why I should have to do this. I belong in my house with my family, and Bradley needs to just get over his hurt feelings and accept what's going to happen. I need to go back home. I need to make things right with him. But I can't. I'm not welcome. I should explain. I arrived home early as I'd planned. I had the groceries I needed for Bradley's favorite dinner, my mom's meatloaf recipe, believe it or not, and a nice bottle of red wine. Idaho potatoes, sour cream, chives, Wisconsin cheddar cheese, and Brussels sprouts. I know lots of people don't like them, but I roast them with olive oil and a little salt and pepper, and they're just perfect. Key lime pie for dessert. Oh, and a few delicate little things I'd picked up at Victoria's Secret that Tuesday. So we'd spend the weekend making things special before I left for my conference, the one he didn't know about yet. The one I was planning on telling him about after dinner. It took me almost an hour to get everything ready. While the meatloaf was in the oven, I cleaned off the table and vacuumed the dining room, put out the good place settings, and had time to shower, do my hair and makeup, and slip into my new blue dress. The color really brings out my eyes. I dressed it up with a necklace Bradley had given me for our 5th anniversary. The kids liked my meatloaf okay, but I had to make mac and cheese for them since they wouldn't eat the potatoes or the sprouts. The instant he got home after picking up the kids, the show began. Brillin and Caden tore around like the whirlwinds they are, and we barely managed to change their shoes and put away their things before dinner. I served their food, got them seated, and was pouring the wine when Bradley joined us, his eyebrow raised in question. I just smiled, beaming the most loving, adoring smile I could muster. It only seemed to make him more concerned. Everyone was happy and pleased. They all praised my cooking. The kids devoured their meal and even had a small slice of key lime pie each. Caden didn't like his, saying it tasted sour. Brillin finished it for him. After we settled them in front of their favorite movie, one they'd seen countless times, Bradley nudged me back into the dining room, where he had already tidied up and loaded the dishwasher. He poured the last of the red wine for me and a finger of Glenmorangie for himself. Neat. Before taking his seat, he inquired if I would disclose the reason behind the evening's special arrangements, questioning if I couldn't surprise him without a particular occasion. I expressed my enjoyment of the evening and acknowledged the effort put into the dinner, but he highlighted that it wasn't a birthday, anniversary, or any special day. It was simply a Friday night, prompting him to inquire further. I admitted to playfully deceiving him, hinting that I might need his help next week. He asked about the nature of the favor, and I explained that I would be attending a conference in Chicago for 4 days, from Tuesday to Friday, requiring him to take on the role of a single dad temporarily. His demeanor shifted slightly as he acknowledged the responsibility he would have to shoulder in my absence. Anticipating our time apart, I teased him with promises of a passionate weekend together before my departure. I leaned forward, adding a suggestive glance to my words, hinting at the excitement to come upon my return. He nodded skeptically, questioning why he was just hearing about the conference at that moment. I explained that the invitation had recently come up, highlighting that I had only been invited and hadn't discussed it earlier. Despite my attempts to reassure him, he expressed his disappointment at being informed late and his concern about the situation. My attempts to calm him down seemed to have the opposite effect. He suddenly stood up, gesturing for me to remain seated, and muttered his frustration. Clearly upset, he tried to control his emotions, acknowledging his desire to avoid arguing in front of the children. He instructed me to put the kids to bed, and indicated that he needed time to gather his thoughts before continuing the discussion. With a tense grip on the chair, he shook his head and went upstairs, leaving me to reflect on how the conversation had not gone as planned. He spent the next 20 minutes pacing around the house like an agitated tiger, glancing at his phone. He'd angrily read something, mutter curses under his breath, and resume pacing. At one point, he made a call and left a voicemail saying, "It's Bradley. She's acting like Linda right now. It's happening now. Please call me the instant you get this." What on earth did acting like Linda mean? What did my mom have to do with this? Not long after, his phone rang, and he stepped outside to take the call, shooting me a glare. Clearly, he didn't want me or the kids to overhear. He returned inside but was called out again after a brief moment. The kids seemed puzzled but unfazed by his behavior. As the movie neared its end, he disappeared into the kitchen where I heard his coffee grinder buzzing. Surprisingly, Brillin and Caden didn't resist their bedtime routine much, brushing their teeth and getting into pajamas without fuss. Somehow they sensed that something was amiss. I too felt jittery throughout. What was troubling him? What did he know? Who was he talking to? And why bring up Mom? With the kids tucked in, I descended to find Bradley back at the table with a full pot of coffee, 2 mugs, and a large Yeti cup. He instructed me to sit, and I obeyed. He poured the coffee, but I declined, mentioning that it would keep me awake. He insisted, saying I would need it. I pressed him to tell me what was bothering him, and he responded by saying he would if I would, assuring me that nothing was wrong. He explained that I was worrying unnecessarily, emphasizing that it was just a conference, a one-time event that I needed to do for myself. I questioned his motives, and he reaffirmed his stance, saying it was exactly as he had stated. He expressed dissatisfaction with the taste of the coffee, prompting me to question what was wrong. Despite my reassurance that the coffee was fine, he began a conversation by asking if I considered him stupid. After affirming that I didn't, he questioned whether I believed myself to be smarter due to my graduate degree in psychology. I denied this and affirmed my respect for him as my husband, partner, and human being. He emphasized the importance of honesty in our conversation and warned against half-truths or sugarcoating. He insisted that he knew more about the situation than I thought and cautioned against lying or manipulation, emphasizing that it wouldn't end well if I attempted to deceive him. I assured him that I would never deceive him, but suggested that he might be deceiving himself. He questioned when I was invited to the conference and how long I had known about it. I explained that I had only mentioned it that evening, claiming it had just happened. He pressed further, asking if I had known before Tuesday and implying that I had planned the evening to soften him up for the news. I defended myself, insisting it wasn't like that. But his silence spoke volumes. I suggested that we go through the questions again. He asked who had invited me to the conference, to which I replied it was a colleague. He continued to inquire about who was covering the expenses for my attendance, pressing for a direct answer. I mentioned that I would reimburse them, but he insisted on a clearer response regarding who had arranged the fees, airfare, and accommodation. He expressed concern over our account statements for the past 3 months, suggesting that either I had planned this earlier or had undisclosed accounts. Despite his evident upset, I reassured him that he had nothing to worry about. He asked if Richard Taylor was attending the conference. I started feeling a surge of dread. A voice in my head mocked me for being foolish, but I pushed back, telling it to shut up and insisting that Bradley didn't know anything for certain. I admitted that Richard might be there as he was presenting on Wednesday. Bradley showed me the conference agenda on his phone, expressing surprise that I didn't know about it. Given my close friendship and professional relationship with Richard, I confessed that I did know but had forgotten. Bradley urged me to stop making up stories and reminded me that he wasn't foolish, leaving me with nothing more to say. Bradley suggested recapping the situation. He asserted that weeks or months ago, my older colleague, who he implied had romantic intentions toward me, invited me on a fully funded romantic trip to the city, which I accepted. He accused me of springing this news on him last minute, distracting him with closeness, food, and romance, and leaving him with the responsibility of the kids to prevent his interference. I protested, denying his accusations. He reminded me of his earlier request not to lie to him or to myself, to which I insisted that I wasn't lying. Bradley interrogated me about the duration of my involvement with Richard. I denied any involvement, but he pressed further, asking about Richard's involvement with me and whether I had been involved with anyone else. He threw in a random question about the capital of California to check my presence of mind. My thoughts raced as I reassured myself that Richard couldn't possibly know anything, as we hadn't been. Duh. Lovemaking. I believed Bradley had to trust me, being my husband. Bradley persisted, accusing me of being clouded by an affair fog and observing my guilty expression. I denied having an affair, but he suggested that perhaps I wasn't involved with Richard yet, noticing my expression change. I explained that Richard had invited me to the conference 6 weeks prior and assured Bradley that we would have separate accommodations and that I would reimburse Richard for expenses. I emphasized the conference's significance for my career and pleaded with Bradley to trust me, reaffirming my love and loyalty to him. Bradley took a slow sip of his black coffee, emphasizing his preference for unadulterated quality. He accused me of diluting that quality by planning everything behind his back, betraying him with secrets, lies, and deception. He asserted that my actions constituted betrayal, though the extent of it remained uncertain. I took a deep breath, trying to reassure myself that I hadn't done anything wrong yet. Bradley accused me of leaving myself vulnerable and setting myself up for closeness with Richard Taylor, suggesting that my actions indicated anticipation rather than explicit planning. I acknowledged that he wasn't entirely wrong in his assessment. My guilt resurfaced, leaving me speechless. Bradley questioned the purpose of the lingerie I had purchased, pointing out that he had seen the charges on the account. I explained that it was intended for him, for our weekend together, and for when I returned from the trip, though there wasn't much packed for the trip itself. He questioned whether any of the items were specifically for Richard, to which I hesitated before admitting that some might have been. Despite my assurances, Bradley expressed his lack of trust in me and his concerns about the situation. He asserted that my actions gave him plenty of reasons to worry, and he set down his mug, signaling the seriousness of the conversation. He laid out the terms, instructing me to leave the house immediately and go to my mother's place. He emphasized that I was not welcome and needed to have a serious conversation about married women's conduct. I was to stay overnight with Tom and Bernice, as he had already informed them, and they were expecting me. I protested, calling it absurd and claiming he couldn't do that. He countered by stating that what was truly absurd was going on a honeymoon with someone else and expecting him to accept it. He reminded me that we had dealt with similar situations before and warned me that if I didn't learn from this, the marriage would be over. He expressed his seriousness, stating that he was dead serious about his decision. I argued that he couldn't force me, as he was my husband, not my boss. He acknowledged that he couldn't control me, but emphasized that if he didn't approve of my actions, he could file for divorce, asserting that it was a matter of partnership within the marriage. Despite my disbelief and protestations, he insisted on ending the marriage, stating that we would sort out the details later and that he would hire a lawyer the next day to serve me with divorce papers. In an attempt to prevent further action, he instructed me to visit my mother and suggested that if I wanted him to refrain from taking legal action, I should comply with his instructions. He reassured me that my mother was expecting me and had been informed about the situation. My phone rang and he urged me to answer. It was my mom who warned me about the seriousness of the situation and advised me to comply with Bradley's instructions to avoid regret. She mentioned baking cookies and hung up, leaving me in shock. My phone buzzed again, and it was my brother Tommy who must have sent another message. He expressed concern about my situation, offering the spare room set up as a nursery for me and assuring me that I could stay as long as needed. Tommy emphasized that I should call when on my way, even if it meant waking them up during feedings. I declined Tommy's offer, but he insisted I come over by the next morning, threatening to sever our relationship if I didn't comply. He made it clear that taking sides against Bradley wasn't an option, asserting Bradley's correctness about the family curse. Tommy concluded the conversation by announcing plans to take everyone to IHOP the next day. Left alone, I questioned Bradley about what he had told Tommy and our family. Bradley stood up and explained that he had shared the truth with them, finding their insights helpful. He encouraged me to finish my coffee, pack a bag, and mentioned making a caramel latte for the road. Bradley assured me he would handle the kids, update his family, and postpone informing Chuck and Bethany to avoid an immediate revelation to my father, who would be devastated. Confused and alarmed, I pressed Bradley for details, particularly about Tommy's mention of a family curse. Bradley redirected me to discuss it with Linda, my soon-to-be ex-wife, leaving me puzzled about the unfolding situation. After downing the coffee with extra skim milk and 2 Splendas on my way out, a 16 ounces Yeti cup of double-shot non-fat caramel latte, a stop for gas, and 2 more for bathroom breaks, I pulled into Mom's driveway at 10 minutes past midnight. The garage door opened, and I parked in the empty bay. Where was Doug's car? Mom greeted me and expressed happiness at my arrival. She mentioned the importance of me coming and shook her head, suggesting it wouldn't have been good otherwise. Inviting me inside, she informed me about cookies in the kitchen and offered tea. At 60, Mom still looked elegant. She maintained her figure gracefully, though it was showing its age. Her posture was impeccable, despite having 2 children. She seemed untouched by osteoporosis. Her dark hair was streaked with gray, but still lustrous and stylishly arranged, and her eyes were as blue as ever like mine. I hoped to look half as good at her age. She began pouring tea without any request from me. I mentioned my preference for no caffeine, explaining that Bradley had made me drink both coffee and a double shot, leaving me jittery. She assured me that the tea she was serving was chamomile and reassured me that I would be fine. Giving me a once-over, she mentioned that I had worn the same dress when talking to Bradley earlier that night. I explained that Bradley didn't allow me to change before kicking me out. I had to grab some stuff and leave. Tommy seemed distressed, repeating, "Oh my," and when I questioned what was wrong with the dress, they mentioned its significance and Tommy's reference to a curse. Confused and desperate for information, I asked about Tommy's comment and the ongoing situation. In response, she handed me homemade ginger snaps and suggested we move to the sitting room for an explanation. There I noticed the TV showing a paused football game, surprising me because my mom typically avoided football. I inquired about Doug's whereabouts, and she revealed that Doug usually stayed with his friend Brian, with whom he had been in a relationship for almost 20 years. The revelation about Doug's handsomeness left me puzzled about why my mom was married to him. She detailed a complicated story about their marriage with Doug, emphasizing the societal pressures that led them to be married. They acknowledged the acceptance of gay couples marrying nowadays, but explained that, at their age, there were various complexities and layers to their situation. Doug, despite admitting he was gay, did not fully accept himself as such, and did not see himself living openly as a gay man. Instead, he considered his relationship with Brian unique. She clarified that Doug didn't feel shame about being gay, it just wasn't how he identified himself. They referred to their situation as being a beard, an old-fashioned term where gay men and lesbians would marry to meet societal expectations but maintain private lives outside the marriage. When asked about their own involvement, she denied being gay but admitted to being a terrible wife. They confessed to ruining their previous marriages due to various negative traits, especially hurting their father deeply. Tears welled up as they expressed their enduring love for their father and admitted noticing the love between me and Bradley, urging me not to become like them. Overwhelmed with emotion, she broke down crying. In response to my confusion, they briefly rose from their seat, gesturing for me to stay put, mentioning they needed to fetch something to show me. While she was away, I heard her rummaging in one of the spare bedrooms. Glancing at the screen, I noticed it wasn't displaying the game but was paused on 2 middle-aged male commentators. They might have been football players in their prime before age caught up with them. Mom returned with a blue dress and a clear plastic dry cleaning cover. She noted that the dress they were showing me wasn't exactly the same as the one they wore, but while the style differed, the skirt's length and color were nearly identical. She shared that she had worn this dress the night she ended her marriage to my father almost 30 years ago. The reason for keeping the dress remained unclear to her, whether as a reminder of mistakes, a connection to their time with Jim, or because it made them feel beautiful. They recounted wearing the dress once more on their birthday that year, but it only made things worse. The incident happened in February, during a snow-in period with little sunlight. They had bought the dress for Valentine's Day, but the plans were canceled, and they ended up spending it with me and someone else. Jim never saw the dress, and to add to the unfortunate circumstances, it was a leap year, extending the duration of the dreaded month. At the time, I was part of a group of women and their husbands. I barely remember their names now. As couples, we were all pleasant, but when it was just us women, well, you wouldn't believe the scheming and gossip. We'd talk about what we'd do if the right man came along. One woman regularly cheated on her husband and boasted about it. Another was planning an affair with a CO worker, and we all supported her. Fortunately, her husband caught on before it went too far. I never engaged in any of that, until one day I did. There was a local sports star who frequented bars and clubs, targeting married women and humiliating their husbands. He seemed to enjoy the power he had over them. He'd take these women to his hotel and give them an unforgettable experience, aiming to ruin them for other men. He was charming, wealthy, and famous, so he got away with it repeatedly. His activities were something of an open secret among women seeking excitement. I don't know how many marriages he destroyed, but it was more than a few. It was like a game to him. One of those venues was a dinner dance hall affiliated with a hotel. Our group of cheaters and aspirants decided to bring our husbands there on February 29th, Leap Night, to reconnect with each other and our spouses. You and Tommy were staying overnight with the porters, and we all had hotel rooms. What our husbands didn't realize was that attending with them was akin to buying raffle tickets. Mark Levier would select one fortunate lady for the evening, making her his chosen companion. That's why the night out excited us girls so much. My attention turned to the screen, where Mark Lavalier, the commentator on the left, appeared. His name was displayed in a graphic beneath his chest, confirming his identity as the revelation unfolded. It became apparent that Mark Levier was Mommy's awful boyfriend. The disclosure shattered my reality, leaving me feeling instantly dizzy and unwell. When questioned about it, I couldn't recall much, only vague memories of staying with Nana and Grandpa while Dad was gone for a while when I was 6 years old. The details were hazy, but I vaguely remembered being upset during that time. My parents had tried to shield me from the situation, acknowledging that I might not recall any of it. During that period, Dad had disappeared for weeks, and counseling was sought as a way to address the issues in their marriage. Mom admitted to attempting to manipulate or control Dad, as he had accused her of doing. The counseling turned into a disaster, and Dad left for Atlanta in a fit of anger for 10 days. Mom didn't know where he had gone until later, when he started taking temporary work assignments out of town. The mistreatment from Mom led to Dad's anger and departure from their marriage. Mom further revealed an incident with Mark, approaching their table and taking her for a dance without permission. They danced for several songs, and Mark instructed Mom to slip out the back with him. When returning to the table for her purse, Mom faced Jim, who had witnessed the entire encounter. Jim covered for her, distracting Dad and allowing Mom to leave. This marked the end of her marriage to Dad. The separation and divorce took another 1.5 years, marking the real conclusion of Mom's marriage. Reflecting on that time, Mom expressed sorrow, acknowledging that the experience was beyond dreadful. However, she asserted that the worst part wasn't the separation itself, but rather the reasons behind it. Mom confessed that she would have sabotaged her marriage eventually, even if Mark the scoundrel hadn't chosen her that night. She highlighted her repeated destructive behavior with 3 different husbands, admitting her self-centered and entitled mindset, which she believed mirrored my current behavior. Mom emphasized that recognizing such behavior wasn't apparent at the time, and insisted that only a different perspective would reveal it. This conversation, she explained, was a kind of intervention, hoping that sharing her story would provide me with insight to change my ways before it's too late. She then shared her thoughts during her marriage with Jim, describing it as solid and deeply committed. Despite Jim being a wonderful and devoted husband, she succumbed to the temptation of a rare opportunity with Mark Lavalier, who promised to transform her into a glamorous, liberated goddess for a single night of enchanting closeness. After that night, Mom expected to return to her loving husband, believing that Jim's love would eventually overcome any initial hurt. She detailed waking up in her mother's recliner, having fainted due to the overwhelming situation. Mom handed me water and cookies, explaining that I had been unconscious for about 30 minutes. She suggested I wouldn't sleep, given the circumstances, and encouraged me to stay and continue the conversation. I expressed my intention to go to bed, but Mom doubted I would sleep, given the resonance of her story with my thoughts. I reluctantly agreed that her story had indeed resonated with me. As I sat with the clear bag containing her blue dress next to me, Mom expressed concern about the possibility of me following in her footsteps. She questioned whether I was destined to ruin every marriage I entered, contemplating if I took my husband for granted while seeking solace in other men. Despite not having strayed yet, she acknowledged my intention to do so. She urged me to listen to my inner voice and expressed concern about the potential doom of my marriage if I continued down this path. When she inquired about my inner turmoil, she considered it a good sign that I was conflicted, but sighed in acknowledgement of the struggle. Mom acknowledged her own skill in silencing the voice of reason, admitting the difficulty of diagnosing and treating herself. As a psychologist, she understood the rationalizations I had made, convincing myself that entertaining another man was acceptable, emphasizing the exhilaration and validation it provided. She cautioned against the dangerous thinking that Bradley's forgiveness would pardon or accommodate such transgressions, likening it to a medication that could lead to self-destruction. She highlighted the broader impact on Bradley, Brillin, Caden, Tommy, herself, and even my father, expressing deep concern about 3 generations of Johnson women following the same pattern of self-destruction. The thought of devastating my father by witnessing this cycle weighed heavily on her. As Mom delved into family history, she clarified that Nana, being a Reed, did not have any known instance of infidelity. However, she pointed to Gamma Carroll, who cheated on James, Jim's father, while he was sick and dying, having a boyfriend named Ralph. Carroll eventually married him after James passed, but the marriage didn't last due to mutual unfaithfulness. Bob entered the picture later through a cancer family support group, and Jim initially distanced himself from his mother, holding her responsible for James's passing. Mom explained that I might not have known this family history because I and Dad were already divorced when they started visiting Gamma Carol and Bob in Colorado. Dad forgave Carol eventually, bridging the divide between them, and he even became friends with Bob, despite Bob not being at fault. Dad forgave his mother, but struggled to forgive Mom. However, he eventually forgave her at my wedding, after 20 years, even though she felt she didn't deserve it. She had been unrepentant, apologizing mainly for the cost it imposed on their relationship, and attributing his hurt feelings to his fault. She admitted to being proud of the affair, emphasizing that her pride was the whole point. Mom expressed her fear of being single, noting that she had never experienced it and wouldn't know how to exist alone. Contrasting this with Dad, who had the wisdom to give himself time before getting seriously involved with someone else. She admitted her lack of understanding about his approach. She acknowledged giving Mark her number the first night they met, leading to subsequent calls and messages. Despite not planning it, she found herself caught up in another one of Mark's pickup spots, contributing to the cycle of relationships without sufficient self-reflection. 2 weeks later, on St. Patrick's Day, at an Irish pub, Mom recounted her shameful behavior when her marriage with Dad was hanging in the balance. She continued to see Mark quietly, even while attempting to patch things up with Dad. Mom thought her interactions with Mark had nothing to do with her relationship with Jim, believing that what he didn't know wouldn't hurt him. Reflecting on her actions, she considered herself stupid and foolish. In an attempt to deceive Dad, Mom pretended to break up with Mark by staging a phone call, playing the recording for Dad. However, Mark persisted until he was certain the divorce was finalized, then moved on to another conquest, a married woman named Maureen. By that time, Mom had already arranged to marry Jeff. Mom emphasized the need to grasp the entire narrative, as it wasn't solely about Dad and Mark but extended further to her marriage with Jeff. Despite Jeff being a decent guy, Mom acknowledged he wasn't Jim. She married Jeff because he was available, and while she might have made it work with effort, she chose not to. Devoted to raising me and Tommy in the family home, Mom saw herself as only a part-time spouse. She had decided that if Jeff truly loved her, he would accept her choices, emphasizing that he had no other choice because he was a good guy. Mom believed that if he cared about being a good husband, he would comply with her decisions. For her, the external factors in her life weren't supposed to impact their relationship, and Jeff simply had to cope with it. Mom claimed it didn't imply she loved him any less and wasn't truly depriving him of anything. She urged her mom to understand and mentioned feeling dizzy and sick, but insisted she wasn't done. Following Jeff, Mom entered a relationship with Danny, seeking a more open-ended dynamic since she knew she would spend time away from the marriage. Danny was open to having other partners, essentially cheating on Mom, and she turned a blind eye to it, considering it her penance. Though she didn't precisely love him, Mom married Danny, and their arrangement persisted for a while. As time passed and her children grew older, Mom felt neglected and intentionally sought attention elsewhere. She reasoned that if an open marriage was acceptable for Danny, then it should be acceptable for her. Feeling she wasn't impacting Danny, Mom believed he would afford her the same leniency she had given him for the past 6 or 7 years. However, she misjudged the situation. As the end approached, Mom initiated things with Glenn. Mom insisted on sharing these details to make her daughter see the recurring pattern in her relationships. Describing Glenn as the best of her husbands since Dad, Mom acknowledged that she took him for granted, assuming he would forgive her regardless of her actions. The most significant argument occurred after Emma's wedding, where Mom essentially ignored Glenn while focusing on reconciling with Dad for closure. Jim had to point out that Mom wasn't tending to her husband, treating Glenn with the same disregard she had shown to Dad, Jeff, and Danny. Mom openly wept as she shared this part of her story. I could only gaze at my mother, absorbing the emotional weight of the revelation. My arms trembled as I urgently struggled my way to the bathroom, barely reaching the toilet before emptying my stomach into the bowl. My mom stood by me, holding my hair as I retched. She tried to console me, sharing her own mistakes, regrets, and misguided choices. In her words, she unfolded tales of broken marriages, selfish decisions, and a repeating pattern of seeking temporary solace outside the commitment she had made. She spoke of her own weaknesses, acknowledging her selfish and thoughtless nature. As my mother revealed the narrative of her tangled relationships, I couldn't help but see echoes of my own life, shadows of the choices I was on the brink of making. She spoke of wearing a blue dress, seeking attention, and taking her husbands for granted. It was as if she was painting a cautionary tale, a mirror reflecting my current struggles and the potential consequences of my actions. My head was as churned up as my belly. The weight of her words hit me harder than I expected. She described a cycle of self-destruction, a path I seemed poised to follow. The realization was both unnerving and awakening. In her tearful confessions, my mother admitted marrying Doug to spare him from the pain she had inflicted on her previous husbands. I comforted her, trying to offer support amid the emotional storm. Yet as the stories unfolded, I couldn't escape the confrontation with my own reflection in her words. When she veered into my current situation, warning me of the consequences of my actions and the impact on Bradley, I felt a surge of nausea. The weight of truth, regret, and impending decisions overwhelmed me, and I staggered, collapsing onto the cold bathroom floor. The room spun, not just from the physical sickness, but from the emotional whirlwind that had gripped me. My mother's stories, a tapestry of missteps and heartbreaks, had wrapped around me, leaving me entangled in the consequences of her choices and the potential echoes in my own life. Struggling urgently to reach the bathroom, my arms trembled as I barely made it to the toilet, retching with Mom by my side, holding my hair. She encouraged me to let out all the bad stuff, emphasizing the realization of the consequences of burning down one's own life repeatedly. Mom expressed a strong desire for me not to follow the same path. In the midst of my emotional and physical distress, I questioned my own actions, berating myself for the poor choices I had made. I acknowledged the warnings, particularly from Bradley, and condemned myself for not heeding them. The harsh self-talk included doubts about deserving my husband's love and the happy home with Brillin and Caden. The fear of following in my mother's footsteps was evident, and I chastised myself for what I perceived as a destructive pattern in relationships. The tirade ended with a bleak prediction of ending up alone after several meaningless marriages in a similar kind of hell. After what felt like 9 years of that, Mom gave me some mouthwash and made me eat 2 more cookies. She said the ginger would settle my stomach. She brushed my hair and let me change my clothes. I didn't even have to go into the bag I'd packed. We're the same size. I could wear any of her clothes, so she gave me some comfy sweats and keds. She bundled me in her car and drove me 2 miles to Tommy and Bernice's house. She's all cried out. Mom informed my brother about my condition as she took care of me, expressing that I now understood the consequences of my actions. She instructed him to put me straight to bed, and she would join them for pancakes whenever I managed to get up and gather myself. Grateful, my brother thanked her and explained that Jonathan and the baby were currently asleep, a precious moment they took advantage of whenever possible. Mom kissed him, expressing love and mentioning seeing him at a more decent hour. Tom guided me inside and directed me to the nursery room, mentioning they weren't using it yet. Little Ella was peacefully asleep with her mother in the master bedroom, nestled in a crib-like extension beside their bed. Tom assured me that he wouldn't lecture me, acknowledging that our mom had probably done enough of that. He understood that I would spend the night processing everything, hoping I could get some sleep. Before concluding, he felt the need to share something about Bradley, clarifying that he hadn't spoken to him since I left. Despite acknowledging that I knew Bradley better, he wanted to emphasize something I might not have seen in him before. In a brother-to-brother-in-law manner, Tom revealed that Bradley was a fighter. He elaborated on Bradley's background as an Olympic fencer who worked as a combat consultant and choreographer for movies and theater productions, emphasizing Bradley's real understanding of a genuine bout, despite making things appear flashy and spectacular. As he referred to Bradley as a fighter, the weight of the words echoed through my thoughts. My brother painted a vivid picture of Bradley's commitment to me and our family, likening him to a warrior, a Navy SEAL, a force to be reckoned with. Despite Bradley's lack of combat experience, my brother emphasized the unwavering determination and protective instinct he held for us. It was a powerful message, a reassurance that Bradley would go to great lengths to keep us safe and united. The gravity of my brother's warning settled in, a stark reminder that attempting anything like my recent struggles would be futile. Bradley, armed with knowledge and a deep commitment, would not be deceived. My brother's intervention had shed light on Bradley's awareness, and I felt a mix of gratitude and relief. In a surprising revelation, my brother shared that our father had warned Bradley about potential challenges before we got married. It was a preemptive son-in-law talk, offering a unique perspective on marriage and human nature. The conversation highlighted the lengths my family had gone to preparing for the possibility of me straying down a destructive path. As my brother expressed his willingness to intervene and support me, I couldn't help but feel a sense of security. He kissed my forehead, offering a brotherly protection that brought comfort and reassurance. That night, I slept soundly, the weight of the revelations and the emotional turmoil of the past days beginning to lift. The next morning, the familiar chaos of family life greeted me, a mix of energetic children, misplaced shoes, and unbrushed teeth. It felt different in this new setting, but there was a hint of nostalgia for the earlier, more hectic days of parenting. As we gathered for breakfast, I couldn't help but admire my brother's family. Bernice, his wife, embodied grace and beauty, effortlessly balancing motherhood with her gymnast's physique and delicate Belgian accent. My brother's protective instincts extended to her, ensuring a haven of security for their family. The pancakes served that morning were not just a breakfast. They carried the flavor of emotional release and the optimism for better days. The conversation navigated away from past troubles, allowing us to share moments of joy and connection. Later, as Mom drove my car to meet us, the mention of a little something in the back caught my attention. She revealed it was her blue dress, a symbolic gesture of letting go. Despite its outdated style, she believed in its comeback, a hopeful reminder that even after facing the shadows of the past, there could be a resurgence of brighter days. I suppose we could classify it as vintage, Mom said with a slight half shrug. You're an adult, a beautiful one. You'll make your own decisions. Do what you want with it, just please try not to repeat my mistakes. Don't use it to break your husband's heart. And for heaven's sake, never let your father catch you wearing it. It would surely give him a heart attack. I won't, Mom. Thank you. Have a safe journey home. I love you. Love you too. Thank you. Thanks for everything. Before starting the car, I sent 2 messages. In the first message to Richard, I canceled my trip to Chicago, instructing him to cancel the plane tickets, the booked room, and the conference registration, seeking a refund for the fee. I suggested finding someone else for his plans, and expressed anger for threatening my marriage and family, almost ruining my life. I demanded no further communication, except in a professional context, which should be kept to a minimum. I warned him to avoid my husband and brother for his own safety, as they were aware of everything. In the second message to Bradley, I apologized for the situation and regretted causing worry. I acknowledged acting without considering him, and promised never to contemplate such actions again. I pledged never to take him for granted, to never underestimate him, and to always prioritize him. I thanked him for intervening and vowed to be the one to stop myself from now on, understanding the family history. I expressed deep love for him and recognized that he deserved better than the neglect, disrespect, and foolishness I had shown. I solemnly promised never to repeat such behavior. As I embarked on the journey home, a realization struck me about what to do with Mom's blue dress. I decided to destroy.
Story 2.
My cheating ex told me to get over it, but I uncovered his affair and how he chose her over me. My boyfriend Dave and I started dating when we were about 15 years old. You can say we were high school sweethearts. In the year 2016, I helped him land a new warehouse job due to a higher increase in pay. We were all so excited for him to start, we celebrated by taking our 2-year-old to Disneyland. At the time, I didn't know what was about to come. Dave finally started his job, and 2 months in, he starts to behave differently with me. This is when I started to get a gut feeling inside of me. He started snapping at me for the littlest of things. He stopped talking to me about work. Intimacy went from 4 times a week to him demanding it every day. It was around our anniversary in February when we were arguing through text. When I asked him if there was someone else, he responded, "Yes." My heart sank. The pain I felt. I never felt that pain in my life. It is not a pain I would wish on anyone. I called him, voicemail. I called him again, voicemail again. He texted me that he needed to go to work and could not talk. I went crazy. I felt weak, lightheaded. My heart and throat felt like it was going to explode. I couldn't pinpoint where I went wrong. The weekend came along and it was February 14th. We talked. He swore nothing ever happened between them. His feelings were intense and it wasn't planned, but he did not want to break up. I felt betrayed, hurt. I asked him to stop talking to her, move apartments. He said he couldn't stop talking to her, they worked together. In my mind, I wondered, how can someone not stop talking to someone else? I told him I understood it's work, but he could unfriend her and only talk to her when he needed. He refused. I continued berating him, telling him if he does not stop talking to her, he loses me. He finally apologized. Months pass and I'm still hurt by the situation, but for some reason, there was still a feeling deep in me that told me he was still talking to her. I brushed that feeling aside because of how in love I was with this man. Come the end of the year, I was transferred to the same workplace as my boyfriend. I didn't tell him. I waited until the week of my first day came. He was shocked. He didn't understand why I was being transferred to this building, red flag number 1. He asked me to ask to move elsewhere. When I asked why it was so bad to be in the same workplace, he said there wasn't anything wrong with it. I probably would not like being there. I told him I was fine, I had no issue, and left it as that. My first day on the job, I met amazing people. I had fun. I enjoy being around people. It was lunchtime. My friend and I found a table, sat, and enjoyed our lunch. Then I saw my boyfriend come in. He and his friend sat at the same table next to us. Picture this, there are 2 seats to his left vacant. I am on his right. His friend and my friend are facing us on the other side of the table. He introduces me to his friend. We then are talking about my first day when I get this feeling. It's weird. I look up, and there is this female walking by around our table. She takes her seat to the left of my boyfriend. My heart sank as I felt my boyfriend tense up. I somehow knew it was her. He did not introduce me to her. Edit, there is more to the story. Not sure if anyone would like to read more. Oh boy, yeah, well, it was sort of expected that whatever thing they had going on was going to, in fact, continue, because they were working together. Honestly, if he had really cared about you and attempted to pick up the pieces of what he broke, he would have quit that job. It wouldn't have mattered if it was a higher increase in pay or not. A loyal partner is priceless. Part 2. I want to say thank you to those who are interested in my story. All this happened a couple of years ago, so there is a resolution to it. I posted my story in 2 parts so it won't be so long. Here's the rest of my story. For context, my boyfriend's name is Dave. The other female? Now we will call her Mary. As Mary made her way to the seat next to my boyfriend, I felt my boyfriend tense up. I somehow knew she was the other one. I looked at my boyfriend and asked him to scoot closer to me. He does. My friend, who I met the first day, looks at Mary, then my boyfriend, then at me. She gives me a questionable look. I shrug my shoulders, expressing that I don't know. Once lunch was over, everyone but my boyfriend and I leave. I could remember thinking, how can I ask him without starting a fight? And why didn't he introduce me? Again, I let it go. I know what you're thinking, how naive of her. And you're right. He was my high school sweetheart, first love. I wasn't ready to know yet. I wasn't ready to go through the pain again. While we worked in the same building, we were in separate departments. We met for lunch, occasionally. The first couple of times I noticed Mary sitting by my boyfriend at lunch. They sat touching elbow to elbow, laughing. I could see it in his eyes. I dismissed it again. As I walked in, she would see me and excuse herself. Mary started sitting on her own for lunch after the 4th day. That gave me some peace, made me think if I was overthinking. Mary is pretty, I thought, but we were significantly different in looks and body. I thought to myself, maybe I was overreacting. It can't be her. The more I worked, the more I started to meet more people in higher positions. They started training me as they saw my work ethic. I was always willing to try something new. I was trained in 2 departments before I ended up in a department next to my boyfriend's. It was an open layout, so I was able to see all of his department as he could see all of mine. One day, I was working on moving boxes off the conveyor down to a pallet and cage. When I looked up, I saw my boyfriend helping a female out. An overwhelming feeling of anxiety came over me. My male friend, Mato, also looked in that direction I was looking. He tells me, that doesn't seem like nothing. My heart was beating fast as I watched my boyfriend's interaction with Mary. He was helping her lift boxes, throw her trash away, laughing and slightly bumping into each other. I smiled and responded, I'm sure it's nothing. That was the first time I encountered their behavior without them knowing I was around. I went home wondering if I should bring it up. I wasn't okay. I was mentally messed up. I cried out. I didn't know if my suspicions were right. I decided to ask him the next day who the girl he fell for was. The next day came. He was driving us to work that day. I turned to him and asked, so will you ever show me who the girl you fell for is? He gave me a puzzled look and said no. I reminded him that he promised me they wouldn't have contact with each other, so why couldn't I know? He responded, telling me it was unnecessary to bring it up. She doesn't know that I know. He didn't want me to make her feel uncomfortable. I asked him if she still worked there. He didn't respond. The silence gave me my answer. I then asked him if she knew about how he felt for her. He said nonchalantly, of course I told her. I asked him why he would tell her, and he responded with, she was asking why I was so upset, so I told her I was confused about my feelings for her. He didn't confirm if she reciprocated his feelings. I was broken again. As the days go by, I start meeting more people in my new department. As I introduce myself to them, the typical questions come through like, how old are you? Are you single? Married? Did you go to school? Are you going to school? Etc. Typical conversation starters for a warehouse job. When I was asked if I was single, I would always respond that I have a boyfriend. Their next question would be, what does he do? I would let them know that he works here. Mind you, this warehouse was open for about a year or so before I started working there. A lot of workers knew each other. This is an important piece of information. A lot of the time, they would ask me who my boyfriend was, and I happily showed them. Every time I did, they responded, "Oh, he's your boyfriend?" I was always scared to ask the next question, but I'm glad I did. "Yes, he is. Why?" I responded. They would chuckle nervously and say, "No reason, I just thought he was with someone else." Every time I pushed forward to know who they were referring to, they would say it was someone who worked in his department. I felt it was a joke. I was here working, and yet I looked like a fool to everyone here. Everyone knew, and I didn't. I'll be posting a part 3. I didn't want to break the story apart, but it was quite long. My apologies. Part 3 will be about me discovering who the other woman is and what happened. Wow, the balls on this guy to actually continue to flirt with her and interact with her while you're working in the same building. That's a new level of disrespect. And not only that, but to tell you that bringing her up is unnecessary because he didn't want to make her feel uncomfortable? Excuse me? Why would you stay with someone who spoke to you and admitted things like this to you, up? High school sweethearts mean nothing when it comes down to this. It doesn't matter how long you've been together with someone. Once they choose someone else over you, he's making you look like a fool in your own place of work. Part 3, sorry for the delays. For some reason, my posts are showing as deleted. Hopefully, this one's the one. For context, my boyfriend's name is Dave. The other female, we will call her Mary. One day I was leaving, and I went to my boyfriend's department to grab him and go. As I got to him, he was in deep conversation with Mary. He does not look at me once, nor acknowledge me. Mary looks my way and signals him with her head that I was there. He looks at me and asks why I was here. I told him it was time to go, and since he was on the way, I thought we could walk together. He looks at the time and says we have 5 minutes more. Then he returns to his conversation with her. I feel like an idiot. Mary looked at me and decided to introduce herself. "Hi, I'm Mary. I don't think Dave has introduced us," she says. I looked at Dave and responded, "Yeah, I don't know why he hasn't." I then introduced myself when Dave interrupts, saying he never had us together to introduce us. He apologizes and says his goodbyes to Mary. I didn't know how to take this. He had us together my first day. He didn't introduce us. I wanted to ask him if it was her, but what if it wasn't? He will get mad that I didn't get over the entire "there's someone else" situation and leave me with our 2-year-old. I was scared. He worked with her very frequently, and it bothered me. The offer came out of the blue to be trained in his department. I wasn't sure if it was a good idea, but I thought, why not? I was trained, and I loved it there. The entire department was incredibly fun to be in. The people were feisty but very uplifting. I used to question why my boyfriend would keep going to Mary for job-related things. He would always tell me she is in charge of what goes out of the workers. I met another person who did the same task as Mary. Her name is Liz. Liz informed me that Mary was her backup, but she needed another person. I asked what her job consisted of, and it was fairly interesting to me, so I offered to be her other backup. It was fun, and I loved it. I started to see Mary less and less the longer I was there. She started working in another department, and every time she would come around, my boyfriend would flirt with her. Our arguments went from once in a blue moon to an everyday thing. I was very uncomfortable with his and her behavior towards each other. He always said I was overreacting, that I need to get over the issue, they're friends, and I need to be okay with that. We were arguing on the way to work, and I couldn't stop crying. Tears would occasionally fall out while I was working. On this particular day, I was in a different department, hidden from most of the people there. It was me and another coworker. He would do his best to have me open up to him. I decided, why not? I told him why I was upset, and thankfully I did, because what he told me changed everything for me. He confirmed everything. He was into Mary, but Mary did not give him the time of day. My boyfriend even intervened in his chance to talk to her by telling him to keep his distance from her. That was it for me. There wasn't any going back. On the way home, I was silent. My boyfriend tried making conversation. I responded with, or That night, we were laying in bed. He was falling asleep, and I woke him. "Hey, babe," I said. "Yeah?" He responded. "Is it Mary, the one you swore you weren't talking to?" I asked. The silence felt like eternity. "Yes, I'm going to sleep," he said. I told him, no, we needed to talk about it. He refused. He told me to let it go. That was his favorite phrase. Let it go. It hurt. He ripped the band-aid that I closed up with his lies. I begged him to talk to me, and he refused, saying if I can't let it go, he's leaving me. I asked if he was being honest because I couldn't completely trust him anymore. He said they had intimacy, and he broke up with me. My world ended. I cried for days and couldn't be myself without breaking apart. I asked him not to tell her anything until I was ready to tell the world we were over. The next day at work, I was stuck in his department. I was sent to deliver some materials to Mary's department. I did. As I was walking back, Mary came up to me, smiling. She asked how I am. I let her know I'm doing fine. At this rate, I'm trying to keep my cool. The next question out of her mouth angers me. How are you and Dave doing? She asks. I know she knows, he told her. I can feel it in my bones. Oh, we broke up, I say. Oh no, why? Because of you, I respond. I didn't mean for anything to happen, I'm sorry. Nothing happened. He's just a friend, that's all we are. You couldn't stop talking to him? I asked. No, we worked together and we were friends, she says. I see my boyfriend as we walk back to my department. He looks scared. I walked by him back to my area and he stopped to talk to Mary. I didn't care what they had to say to each other. I hated him. I hated her. I'll end my story here. In the end, I begged him to get back together. In the moment, that's all I ever wanted, to keep our family together, to go back to how we once were. I wanted us to be okay again. I have no idea what happened between him and Mary during our separation. He swore he did not want to look like a jerk and jump into a relationship with her. I don't know what the truth is. I hated him still when we got back together. I have never felt so low in my life. I asked him to choose his friendship with Mary, or he could be with me and co-parent our kid. Instead of ending his friendship by telling her he chose to quit, what a coward. A couple of months later, I ended up pregnant again, but that was the plan. We wanted to give my first child a sibling, so we agreed to have one more. I remember on Mary's last day we were working together, not by choice. We were civil towards each other but did not speak unless needed to. She asked me for help with some boxes. I responded, I can't lift these boxes. She said we could lift them together. I responded that I couldn't because I was pregnant. She looked surprised and gave me an obviously fake-sounding congratulations. I responded, yep, and walked away. Now you may ask if my boyfriend and I are still together? No. Do I still hate him? No. Do I blame Mary? No, but it would have been nice if she was a girl's girl. Do I believe Mary or Dave about nothing happening or if they were intimate? I don't know. I will never know. Trust was broken. Thank you for reading my story. I was naive for a really long time. No one deserves to be cheated on. It's sad that there are people out there who, instead of leaving their partner, decide to cheat. I'm sorry for anyone going through this. It scars you and changes you. I still, to this day, have trust issues, but I am working through it. Now for a couple of community comments, how was Dave as a co-parent? The op replies, honestly, it was hard in the beginning. We fought a lot, but as the months went by, we slowly started coming to terms that we don't and can't keep fighting, especially with kids. Anyways, he's coming through. I love how he is with the kids, and if I need any help on my days due to work, he's always down to help me. Someone else asked, is Dave with Mary now? The op replies, no, they didn't end up together, from what I know. When Dave quit, he cut off some communication with her and everyone from work. Oh, op. Your relationship with Dave ended long before you were trying to beg for it to stay together. Not only that, but he completely humiliated you. I feel like you may still be a little naive about what happened. And yes, it's sad that there are people out there who cheat instead of leaving their partner. But what's also sad is there are people who decide to stay with their partner who cheat on them right in front of their face. And they have to witness it every day at work. What do you make of all this?
Story 3.
The dull thud of dirt hitting the coffin echoed on the gloomy day. I stood there, observing as the minister uttered consoling words for those mourning. My daughter clutched my hand, her husband standing just behind us, offering support with his hand on my shoulder. Beside me stood my son and his girlfriend. At 49 years old, I never expected to be standing graveside burying my wife. I always believed deep down I would be the first to go. I thought that due to my work and the way I had lived my life, I would surely die before my wife, and that when I did, I'd be an old, old man. Now I felt old, ancient. After the funeral, there was the reception. Everyone coming up to me, telling me how sorry they were, how great she was, how wonderful we were, how young she was. Everything but what I needed to hear. We had been married over 20 years, 2 kids, both now off on their own. The youngest, my daughter, is married and about to have my first grandchild. The oldest, my son, is working in New York City in the financial district. Both are doing well with all the people at our house. I guess it's my house now. See, I'm having a hard time adjusting to this, being single. Everything for the last 20 years has been ours, not mine. Anyway, about 40 people were around talking and offering their support. I just wanted to be alone at the moment. Feeling quite fed up, I finally slipped out into the backyard and worked my way out the back gate, intending to take a short walk. As I closed the gate, someone drove up the alley and parked their car right next to where I was standing. How was I holding up? It was Marie, my wife's younger sister, the one person in the world I didn't want to see at the moment. It was partially Marie's fault that my loving wife was no longer here. If Marie had kept her interests to herself, Brenda would still be with me. I informed her that I was going for a walk, mentioning that everyone was inside and she had been talked about. I didn't smile, nor did I openly invite her. I just stated the facts as I saw them. I now wanted to be away from here for certain, and I was sure Marie would try to invite herself on my walk. I should have known better, as she just brushed past me and went into the backyard. She had always been all about Marie. That's why when Marie had taken a sudden interest in Brenda's personal life, that I became suspicious. That was out of character for her younger sister in many ways. I sighed, glad to be free of her for the moment. There was a cloud hanging between us and a chasm that to me seemed insurmountable. Now, family or no, Marie was persona non gratis around me. It's a long story about what happened and how it all mushroomed into the funeral. Today, life goes on just like water in a river, always moving relentlessly onward. Okay, here's my story. This is the account of what unfolded in my life. Brenda and I crossed paths after college at her workplace, an insurance company where I went to renew my house and car policies, and she happened to be my assigned agent. Following our initial meeting, I found myself finding reasons to return, eventually summoning the courage to ask her out. After a few months of dating, we realized our deep love for each other and decided to get married. We had 2 children, and our marriage was full and wonderful. Up until 2 years ago, I never doubted my decision to marry Brenda. We were like 2 peas in a pod, incredibly compatible. Then Marie became intrigued by Brenda's life. I believe her intentions were well-meaning, thinking Brenda needed to expand and grow as a person striving to be better and more loving. You could see in Marie that she had been trying hard to assist Brenda with what she perceived as shortcomings. It all began with Wednesday night outings, expanding to include Fridays, as Vince noted. After a while, Marie started spending more time with Brenda than I did, taking advantage of Brenda's time when I would normally be at home. It soon became all about Marie. When it became a daily routine, I began to withdraw from Brenda every time I attempted to spend quality time with my wife. Marie always seemed to be present when I wanted Brenda to join me or when I planned to take Brenda out for dinner. What was once a communicative and open relationship soon became closed off and non-talkative. I couldn't express my feelings without Brenda becoming upset, accusing me of being harsh and unfair to her younger sister. If all I was going to do was upset my wife by attempting to be with her, then why bother? A few months after the growing girls' night out became a significant part of our lives, I could see that my marriage was in serious trouble. Yet, I couldn't talk to my wife about it without her becoming upset and defensive. So I did the worst thing I could have done. I gave up. I spent my time pursuing my interests, and Brenda began doing her own thing. On our rare nights at home together, we felt like 2 strangers living in the same house. Then one night, or rather early morning, it all started the night before everything went awry. I was at home working in the garage on a project on a Friday night, while Brenda and Marie were out on their usual Friday night outing. They left the house around 6:30, and I found myself preparing my own dinner, increasingly eating in the garage. So I got dinner ready, took it out there, and listened to my boombox as I worked and ate. It was soothing. I worked until 11 and then went inside. I half expected Brenda to be in bed already, but I was somewhat surprised to find she wasn't even home yet. I noticed the light flashing on the phone, indicating a waiting message. The message mentioned that she was staying at Marie's for the night due to being out for a while and not being in a condition to drive home. The message also conveyed the intention to see me in the morning. I thought to myself, why bother? I never see you anymore anyway. Just move in with your sister and be happy. Update. Yeah, I'll confess, I was angry and envious. I felt a void when Marie developed a particular interest in her sister, and now I couldn't figure out how to reclaim my wife. I longed to be with Brenda, missing our conversations, laughter, and the gentle banter of a couple who knew each other confidentially. Recently, it seemed I also missed the playful moments we once shared. After replaying and deleting the voicemail, I overheard men's voices in the background at Marie's house with my wife, and it sounded like a party. When I called after 9 rings, a man answered and mentioned it was my money, advising me not to waste it. I requested to speak to Brenda, but the man described her as being occupied and suggested calling back around noon the next day. He identified himself as her husband. Despite my insistence to speak to her, he abruptly hung up on me with a dismissive remark. Furious, I redialed multiple times over the next half hour, but nobody picked up. After trying 3 times and growing angrier, I finally had enough. Snatching my car keys, I left the house and drove to Marie's, finding nobody home. Then I recalled I had dialed Brenda's cell phone. I had no idea where she was or who she was with. I didn't know if she was there willingly or if she had been abducted. I knew nothing. I drove home angrier than ever. Angry and scared, I went in and poured myself a drink. At some point, I concluded that Brenda was doing this willingly, and the police couldn't or wouldn't intervene for 24 hours. I even considered that Brenda had invited the men. My mind played tricks on me, worsened by drinks. In the morning, I woke with a pounding headache and dry mouth. After a shower and getting dressed, I took some aspirin. In the mirror, I saw a man with a haunted, lost look. After a light breakfast, I waited for either a phone call or Brenda to return. Around 2 o'clock, she pulled into the driveway, looking great in one of my favorite dresses, slinky and tight-fitting, revealing lots of leg and a bit of chest. Brenda had only worn it on special occasions with me, and even then, only if she intended for a late night. She explained that she hadn't come home the previous night, citing an evening with Marie involving a few too many drinks. By the time they reached Marie's place, she was too tired to drive, so she stayed there. Brenda mentioned crashing at her sister's place, sleeping until a little while ago, taking a quick shower, and now being back. Observing my demeanor, she inquired about my apparent upset, asking what was wrong, mentioning my name. I expressed my concern, mentioning that I had called her cell several times the previous night. After the first call, the person who answered informed me that she was occupied. I identified myself as her husband, but he promptly hung up. Subsequent calls went unanswered. Observing the dress she was wearing, I couldn't help but wonder if she had worn it for someone else. Additionally, I questioned where she had worn it, as when I went to Marie's, neither of them was there, and her place was dark. Brenda took a seat, but unfortunately, she missed the chair. As I spoke, she turned, reacting to the news that I had called, and a man had answered her cell phone, turning white in the face. It seemed she miscalculated the distance to the easy chair, landing about a foot or so away. Despite being on the floor, she remained motionless, hands on her face and tears streaming. Unable to bear the situation, I perceived her shame, and it was evident she had done something regrettable. Frustrated, I rose and stormed out to the garage. I locked the door, cranking up the stereo as loud as I could stand it. In those couple of hours, I accomplished little beyond venting my frustration by crushing things around and cursing at Marie, Brenda, and the person who answered the phone the previous night. As I cooled off and silenced the stereo, I pondered the unraveling of my marriage, attributing it all to Marie. In my perspective, happiness and love between Brenda and me had thrived before Marie, but she had driven us apart. Now it seemed Brenda sought happiness or satisfaction elsewhere, possibly from another man, or worse, multiple men. During my time in the workshop, the realization sank in that I likely lost Brenda for good, heading towards a divorce. Returning to the house, I found myself alone, assuming Brenda sought solace at Marie's. In our bedroom, I was shocked to see Brenda's dresser drawers open and empty. Scanning the closet, I noticed only a few sporadic items, hardly worn anymore. She had left me. Given it was a Sabbath, online banking was my only option. I went online, strategizing how to rearrange finances to safeguard myself if Brenda opted for a permanent departure. I was determined not to suffer financially after years of diligently building a substantial savings and bank account. Subsequently, I reached out to a friend who had experienced divorce, scheduling a meeting to discuss Brenda and me. I also informed our kids about the strained situation between their mom and me, clarifying that she might have moved out. When my daughter inquired about her whereabouts, I honestly admitted I didn't know. Update. A week passed, during which I immersed myself in work, attempting to divert my focus from the disarray of my deteriorating home life. Each night, I resorted to drinking and sleeping, rising just in time for a quick shower before returning to work. This marked 1 week since I had last seen my wife. I met up with my friend, and our conversation didn't yield much advice beyond what I already had a sense of. The primary suggestion was to safeguard my assets first, then address Brenda's intentions and actions. Throughout the entire week, Brenda remained silent, with no phone calls or visits to my workplace until Saturday night. I became convinced she had abandoned our relationship long before, now likely involved with another man. That night, I decided to call Marie's house. Marie was surprised to learn that Brenda wasn't home with me, assuming she was still upset and staying close to home. I informed her that she hadn't seen Brenda at all, expressing that it wasn't right. I suggested that what happened between us was because of her. Marie contested, stating that it was awful harsh and that I didn't mean that. I affirmed, expressing that I did mean it. We were fine until Marie started taking Brenda out every Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday night. I conveyed that her girls' nights out had ruined us, and I hoped she achieved whatever it was she was aiming for. I mentioned that Brenda was gone, and I was sure we were about to get divorced. If she wasn't with Marie, she must be with that person who answered her phone last Friday night. Marie, surprised that I knew about last Friday night, disclosed that on Saturday afternoon, Brenda showed up at home in her wanna-get-laid dress, all freshly showered. She shared that she told Brenda about some strange guy answering her phone, and Brenda sat on the floor and cried. Later on, when Marie came in from the garage, Brenda had packed her things and left. Marie concluded by saying that her actions had cost me my wife and warned her not to come around me again. Despite her pleas not to hang up, my anger prevented me from listening. I just wanted to shut everything out. Her, Brenda, the other man, and life in general. The word furious didn't capture my feelings adequately. Simply hearing Marie on the phone reignited my rage. I was angry and lost, with my wife somewhere unknown, and no means of repairing our relationship. After a heated exchange over the phone, I slammed it down so forcefully that I broke the handset, adding the purchase of a new phone to my growing list of concerns. It took a while before I mustered the energy to get up and go to bed, realizing I had been sitting in the same spot where Brenda had collapsed on me not so long ago. By morning, I concluded that I had come out on the losing end and would have been better off staying up all night drinking. A dreary Sunday morning greeted me, and I was in no mood to deal with anyone. Around noon, I heard a car pull up in our front driveway, and looking out the window, I saw my son emerging. My son asked about what had happened around here, mentioning that Mom came to his place a week ago, upset and crying. She wouldn't talk to him about anything except that I was going to leave her. He inquired about what was going on. I informed him that we were having problems and that she left me. She packed her things and ran, and this was the first I knew where she was at all this time. He mentioned that Mom came to his place, adding that it was kind of embarrassing as he had a friend over, and she spent the night. He didn't know where Mom had been. He asked when she showed up at my place. I answered that it was on Sunday, after he called and talked to me. She refused to let me call him and talk to him. She wanted me to leave him alone for fear that he'd hunt her down. He questioned what was going on and if I was going to hurt her. I explained that I was tired. It had been a week of worry and stress like none I'd ever had before. Now my son had to drive over 300 miles on a Sunday to ask me what was going on and why his mom was at his place, refusing to let him talk to me. Last week she went out with Aunt Marie. Mom told me about that. She ended up missing your call, and somehow you got real angry about it. What got into you? Why would you do that? I explained that she missed my call and that's what she told him, just that she missed my call. I shared that she mentioned someone else intercepted the call before she knew about it, and I got real mad at her. She was afraid, so she ran. He noted that she missed telling him some important details and asked me to tell him what happened. I recounted that last Friday night, Mom went out with Aunt Marie like clockwork. I was in the garage working on a few things for a while, came in about 11, and found Mom wasn't home yet. I saw she had left a message on the phone that I had missed, stating she had too much to drink and was going to stay at Marie's. My son acknowledged that Mom told him about the message part. He mentioned that when she left the message, he replayed it to ensure he understood it correctly, noting that I often did that. He replayed it and heard men's voices in the background, which worried him. So he called Mom's cell phone, it rang 9 times, and a strange guy picked up. He asked to speak to her, and the guy told him she was tied up at the moment and to call back tomorrow afternoon. He identified himself as her husband, but the guy hung up after telling him to duck off. I responded, realizing that Mom had sugarcoated that part. He asked if Mom cheated on me, and I admitted that I wasn't sure what happened. She left before we talked about it, but she seemed guilty about something. I hadn't spoken to her since Saturday afternoon. He suggested that we needed to talk to each other, proposing that we come over to his place to discuss things. He assured us that he and his new girlfriend would be there to support us. I agreed to talk, and he emphasized that we should come as we are, without weapons. He recognized my anger, but urged us to work things out and not let this situation fester. He offered to follow me home, and I considered riding with him in case things didn't work out at his place. He assured me that he would make sure I got home okay. During the drive to my son's place, I realized that I still had some love for Brenda, even if she had cheated on me. I think that right at that moment I was willing to try to work things out with her. When we got to Mark's place, he parked and we went inside. His girlfriend was sitting with Brenda, and when I walked in, they both got up, looking nervous. She greeted me, asking how I had been. I felt the anger boiling inside me. Without checking myself, I began to blow up, barely managing to curtail my anger in time. I yelled at her, accusing her of cheating, and saw her shrinking from me. I had to pause and catch myself, apologizing for my outburst. I admitted that I had been okay, drinking a bit too much lately and feeling confused about things. She looked pale and nervous. The woman I loved, the woman I had spent the better part of my life with, was afraid of me. That hurt me. Deep inside, my heart was breaking. I loved her still, and she was afraid of me. I wondered if we could patch things up when a young woman, presumably the guest, interjected, introducing herself as Jill. She expressed a wish that we could have met under better circumstances. I took her proffered hand and shook it gently, responding that I shared the same sentiment and hoped we could get to know each other a bit more. Although Mark hadn't mentioned seeing anyone yet, I glanced knowingly at him, conveying a slight reprimand in my eyes. Jill urged us to talk while she and Mark would be in the other room, ready to intervene if things got difficult. They emphasized the need for us to keep our cool due to the thin walls and floors in the apartment building. After Mark and Jill left, Brenda began to explain things to me, expressing sincere apologies. I responded by asking if she had something to be sorry about, questioning if she had slept with some guy. She clarified that it wasn't exactly that, and I pressed for more information. I confronted her about sleeping with more than one guy, and her revelation stunned me. I was flat out shocked. This was not the person I had married years ago, and I felt like I didn't know who she was anymore. She admitted that she didn't do this openly and freely of her own choice. She explained that she was drunk and had consumed too much drinks that night. Marie had been pushing her for weeks to get out, and perhaps loneliness played a role. She couldn't fully understand how it all came about, but suddenly found herself on a bed with 2 men. Initially, it started with just one guy, but by the end, she had been with all of them. Marie was there too, and by the end of the night, she had been with all of them, including Marie. The guys had arranged it in a way that she didn't consider it spoliation, and she was drunk enough not to think about the consequences until it was far too late. Her revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. I had expected to hear she had cheated on me. I hadn't figured more than one man, nor her and Marie doing things together either. They were sisters, for Christ's sake. I sat there not knowing what to say. Our talk had taken about 5 minutes so far, and we were already into the part about her having been with other men. She wasn't hiding I didn't think she was hiding anything from me. She must have read my mind. She expressed a willingness to tell me whatever I wanted to know, sharing that she wasn't sure how everything came to be and when she became involved in it. She admitted to not remembering her wedding vows or her husband waiting at home. At one point, she found herself begging for more, and she described herself as a terrible person who didn't deserve me or even to live. Her sobs overtook her ability to speak, and she collapsed. I observed her, feeling unsure about the person in front of me. Shocked and stunned, I couldn't find the words to respond. The situation overwhelmed me, and I started to feel ill. Update. I started to throw up. I calmed down and was able to settle the stomach with a glass of water. Wiping my face off, I returned to the kitchen table. Brenda was in tears, crying softly. I wanted to go to her and hold her. The problem was, I didn't know if it would be okay ever again. I sat down heavily, wanting to be able to know what to say or ask without getting sick again. She explained that the nights out with Marie were not for scouting men and that it had never happened before. They had gone to a new club and she had been drinking too much. The guys at the club were buying them drinks, dancing with them and complimenting them, making her feel beautiful and playful. The next thing she knew, she called me and left a message that she was too drunk, and they went to the guy's place. I interjected, expressing my frustration, stating that lately she hadn't been paying attention to me. I pointed out that she and Marie were the reason, as they hadn't been letting me even try. I reminded her that I had tried to get her to go out with me, but she had insisted on being with Marie. I accused her of lying to me as the message she left mentioned she was at Marie's place. She clarified that at the time she thought they were going to Marie's place, but the men wanted to take them to their place first for a minute to pick up something. She explained that they didn't think it would be a problem, but ended up getting involved in a regrettable situation. She mentioned that if only she hadn't thought I should have paid more attention to her, she might have been better prepared to fend off what happened. I couldn't contain my frustration, raising my voice as she continued to suggest it was my fault. I pointed out that she had been the one ignoring me, consistently going out with Marie every Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday night. I accused her of pushing me out of her life and taking up Marie's cause to me. I noticed a change in her eyes as she realized she couldn't blame me entirely for her actions. She admitted that she hadn't realized it was her until now and acknowledged that I was right about that part. She recognized that her constant presence with Marie had led to my lack of attention. I questioned if she enjoyed being in such situations, referring to her use of the term "Scarlet Woman" several times. She denied ever calling me a Scarlet Woman or treating me like one, expressing her hatred for it. I learned that she discovered she liked what she did with those men, citing the tastes, textures, sizes, and combinations as factors that intrigued her. She admitted to enjoying the different and new experiences and acknowledged that some of them were things she had always wanted to try with me, but couldn't bring herself to ask. She expressed regret for losing herself in the situation and recognized that she had lost me. She hated that she had engaged in closeness acts with other men, things that should have been reserved for me. I responded with a sense of uncertainty, stating that there might be a chance to move past this difficult time. She seized on this glimmer of hope, expressing a willingness to do anything to be with me and stay married. She promised not to go out anymore unless I was with her, committing to being a stay-at-home wife and doing anything I wanted. I remained skeptical, questioning her sudden willingness to talk and work with me. I raised concerns about her past actions, especially when she was going out with Marie, and questioned whether she would resume such behavior when things cooled off. I emphasized that Marie had driven a wedge between us, taking up the time we used to spend together. I expressed my discontent, stating that I was sorry for her previous actions. I conveyed that I had not fully realized the extent to which she had been ignoring and avoiding me, questioning why she allowed herself to do so. I made it clear that things wouldn't be simple moving forward, highlighting the fact that she had cheated on me and us. I asked about her involvement with other men, emphasizing the emotional toll it took on me. I confronted her about the idea of passing it off as staying with Marie, and questioned if she would have continued lying if I hadn't found out. I expressed my rising anger, and Brenda could see it in my eyes as my voice increased in volume. Mark and Jill discreetly entered the kitchen. In that instance, my son suggested a short break, proposing that either he and I or Jill and I could take a walk. Jill took hold of my arm, guiding me out of my chair. Though I had already half risen, her tug felt powerful, indicating her strength. She suggested that we go for a walk, allowing me to share my thoughts while Mark and Brenda had their conversation. I agreed, acknowledging that it was probably the best course of action in that moment. My anger had been escalating, and it had reached a point where I might have lost control. The diversion provided by the suggestion to take a walk spared us from a potentially volatile situation, but the unsettling thought of what might have happened lingered in my mind. As we strolled about a block, Jill initiated a conversation with me. She acknowledged my anger, expressing that Brenda and she had discussed Brenda's actions while Mark had fetched me. Jill conveyed that Brenda was genuinely remorseful and sorry for jeopardizing her marriage, plagued by guilt over the entire situation. I listened to her, absorbing the information. Eventually, I responded, emphasizing Brenda's significant mistakes. I articulated my frustration, highlighting how Brenda's sister Marie had taken up much of her time that she had previously spent with me. The revelation of their involvement in a drunken encounter fueled my resentment, and I expressed a deep sense of hatred at that moment, unsure whether I would ever overcome it. Jill shared a personal anecdote about her parents, revealing that they had faced a similar situation a few years ago when her mom went out with friends and ended up getting involved with someone. Her initial concern for her dad's reaction shifted to relief when they managed to work things out, although she clarified that it didn't necessarily mean they stayed married. Acknowledging the complexity of Brenda's actions, Jill emphasized that Brenda's mistake was significant and had occurred on multiple levels. Despite this, Jill believed that Brenda still loved me. She reassured me that, despite appearances, Brenda hadn't cast me aside. According to Jill, Brenda had made a grave error, finding herself in a situation that spiraled out of control too quickly. Jill attributed such situations to the influence of drinks and medications, leading to lowered inhibitions, peer pressure, and unintended consequences. Walking and talking with Jill, I expressed my perspective on the situation, mentioning that Brenda had strayed while I remained faithful. I also pointed out the impact of Brenda's sister Marie, frequently coming over and taking her away from me. As we continued our conversation, I noticed my anger subsiding, thanks in part to Jill's soft and soothing way of talking. Reflecting on the uncertain future of my relationship with Brenda, I admitted to feeling messed up inside. Despite attempting to sound cheerful, I couldn't shake the emotional turmoil. I acknowledged that part of my struggle involved understanding how Brenda found herself in such a situation. Suppressing my anger, I tried to maintain composure, recognizing the need to rise above any potential righteous indignation. Jill encouraged me to ask any questions I had. Though I attempted to lift my mood, the emotional toll persisted. Jill inquired about the state of our relationship before Marie's frequent visits. I shared that, despite the natural fading of the initial magic in our 20-year marriage, I believed things were fine, perhaps even better than many couples with the time we spent together. In our conversation, Jill asked if I used to take Brenda out frequently. I admitted that perhaps I had taken her for granted, and that Marie played a significant role in driving a wedge between us. I explained that whenever I attempted to spend time with Brenda, Marie interfered, either causing Brenda to refuse or getting upset for taking her away from her sister. I expressed my frustration with Marie, referring to her as the bish at the moment. Jill probed deeper, asking about the romantic aspects of our relationship. I confessed that, given our long history together, I assumed the effort to maintain the relationship was a thing of the past. Jill emphasized the importance of romance, distinguishing it from mere physical relationships. I acknowledged the oversight and recognized the need to express my feelings more, regretting not putting in more effort to make Brenda feel cherished. As Jill continued to guide me through self-reflection, she emphasized the significance of small gestures in nurturing a relationship. I admitted that I should have worked harder to convey my thoughts and feelings to Brenda, realizing that being more romantic might have made a difference. Jill's efforts to make me think clearly were evident, though I acknowledged that Brenda's time with Marie had already taken away the opportunity for equal time together. Jill pointed out that some of the biggest fights in our marriage revolved around Brenda and Marie's girls' nights out, emphasizing that Brenda seemed more focused on her sister than on our relationship. She suggested that our drift apart was noticeable, and while acknowledging Brenda's wrongdoing, she also hinted that better communication and understanding might have prevented the situation. I expressed frustration, wondering if Jill was taking Brenda's side, but she assured me that it wasn't about blame. Jill acknowledged that Brenda needed something she wasn't getting from me, and if we had addressed those issues earlier, it might have averted the crisis. I defended my efforts, stating that I never considered cheating despite my frustrations with Brenda's time spent with Marie. Jill urged me to talk to Brenda directly, advising a calm and direct approach. She reminded me that Mark thought highly of me and emphasized that divorce might not be the solution. Encouraging open communication, Jill suggested that resolving our issues through conversation could rekindle our love and help us move past the recent challenges. Update. I wish I could exude the confidence Jill showed. She seemed knowledgeable, possibly having learned from her parents' past troubles. Back at Mark's, Brenda was composed, waiting for our conversation. I confronted Brenda about the state of our relationship, expressing uncertainty about where we stood. Brenda admitted she wanted to be with me, but acknowledged the uncertainty of my acceptance after her betrayal. She apologized sincerely, emphasizing that apologies couldn't undo what happened and that we needed to face and address the issue. In response, I conveyed my struggle, not only with the act of cheating, but also with the circumstances involving multiple individuals. I pointed out the hurtful aspect of involving her sister and expressed the pain of trying to win her back while she was unresponsive, only for her to seek a chance after being with others. Brenda regretted her actions, claimed it was never her intention to cheat, and attributed the situation to the influence of drinks. I questioned whether there was still room for me in her life, expressing concerns about the impact of her choices on our relationship. The conversation left us both grappling with the complexities of trust, forgiveness, and the potential for rebuilding our connection. Brenda pleaded with me not to say certain things, expressing her love for me and acknowledging her severe mistake. She admitted the impossibility of undoing that terrible night, expressing her hope for forgiveness and trust in the future. Brenda proposed a trial separation, recognizing our uncertainties about the way forward. As she spoke, a tear welled up in Brenda's eye, indicating her preparedness for my potential decision. I felt torn between conflicting emotions, a sense of satisfaction in seeing her pain, mixed with a deep love and desire not to lose her. Brenda, however, expressed understanding if I chose to pursue a divorce, recognizing her lack of excuses and the inability of her words to prevent my departure. She reluctantly agreed to a trial separation if that was what I thought we needed. Jill intervened forcefully, cautioning against a trial separation that could lead to a swift divorce, drawing from the experience of her own parents. She suggested a different approach, emphasizing the importance of facing the mistake together, proposing separation within the same house to encourage communication, and working through the issues rather than drifting further apart. I remained silent, absorbing Jill's perspective on the matter. The authority in her voice resonated with some truth to me. I acknowledged that what she said was reasonable, but what about those thoughts of mine and my pleasure in Brenda's pain? I looked at Brenda and contemplated for a bit. Could I let her into my house again? Could I resist the urge to kick or hurt her over the next weeks or months? Could I ever learn to cope with all that had happened? Jill's voice broke the silence, addressing me and my son, expressing concern about the situation. Mark joined in, questioning what was happening and awaiting a response. I acknowledged the pressure, expressing uncertainty about the safety of a trial separation considering my current anger. I admitted to feeling a significant amount of anger over the situation. Jill and Mark understood my emotions, and Jill emphasized the importance of being together to work through our issues, citing her parents' experience. She insisted that staying together and facing the challenges was the only way to find out if we could make it work. I contemplated Jill's words, pondering the realistic alternatives available to us. Expressing my doubts, I found it challenging to believe that being with Brenda and working through our issues was the right solution. The lingering anger I felt raised concerns about the potential for physical damage if we were together. I was aware of the toll our separation had taken on both of us over the past week, and I didn't want us to become another statistic in the grand scheme of life. Addressing Mark and Jill, I expressed my displeasure with feeling coerced into a decision. I made it clear that I wouldn't make such a crucial choice under duress. Instead, I requested Mark to take me to a motel for the time being, promising to communicate my decision the next morning after having some time to reflect on the situation. Update. When I returned the next morning in a cab, Brenda appeared to be still sitting in the same place, and Mark and Jill had noticeably more somber expressions on their faces than they had yesterday. It was evident that none of them had slept at all. I knew I had to give them my answer. I suggested to Brenda that she should return home, assuring her that I would make an effort not to damage her physically. However, I acknowledged the likelihood of occasional outbursts of anger. Emphasizing the need to be together to address our issues, I proposed a temporary arrangement where we would stay in separate bedrooms, physically apart, yet attempting to work through our challenges. I made it clear that I couldn't guarantee anything beyond that. Brenda sat there, tears running down her face. I could see she was happy about it, yet apprehensive too. She was thinking, What if I got violent or something? I could see it in her eyes. I probably had the same look in mine too. Trust goes a long way to dispelling that look. And the trust in our marriage was now long gone. It was going to be a long, hard road for a while. Brenda suggested counseling, a topic that had crossed my mind earlier when her nights out with Marie had already strained our relationship. I acknowledged the need for counseling, both individually and together, and agreed to initiate the process the next day. Brenda, in response, left the kitchen briefly and returned with suitcases in hand. My son Mark asked if we could go home, and I mentioned that my car was in a local parking garage. Mark volunteered to retrieve it, and Jill offered to drive. In the midst of this, Mark dropped a surprising bombshell. He had proposed to Jill last Saturday night, and she had accepted. I expressed my acceptance of Jill into the family and wished them happiness together, regardless of what happened between Brenda and me. We left together. It was a quiet, intense trip home. Though each of us was in deep thought, that whole next week went the same way. The tension kept building and building. Our first appointment together with the counselor was the following week, and I wasn't sure we'd make it. We did, but just barely. We made that first appointment, and the following ones, until one day, the counselor cut us loose on our own. We had spent the last 8 months going once a week together. Separate individual visits were interspersed between those. We worked it out, and while it was not easy, we managed to get around the whole nightmare in the end. One day, Brenda came home from the doctor, appearing troubled. I sensed that something serious was amiss, but she hesitated to disclose the news. Eventually, she took a solitary walk, and when she got back, she informed me in the living room. "Jeff, I have some bad news about me." I asked, "What?" knowing that she'd never cheat on me again. I also understood that she'd been bothered by something for quite some time now. Brenda had always been one that didn't like to talk about her issues with anyone, even doctors. She broke down crying, expressing, "I am sick, Jeff, real sick. They said that I have cancer." I learned that it started in her ovaries and had spread, and unfortunately they didn't catch it in time, as she left the statement unfinished. She conveyed, "They don't think I was numb for the second time in my life." I questioned what she meant. Brenda reassured me that we would fight, that this cancer could be beaten. There were treatments, and we would win this battle together. I shared my thoughts with her, mentioning that each thing I said seemed to bring more tears from Brenda. As time passed, I began to wonder if she was going to fight at all. She conveyed, "It's beyond fixing, Jeff. This appointment today was with a specialist that my doctor wanted me to see. He ran a few tests and made me wait for the results. He was about to cry when he told me the news." Brenda revealed that the cancer had spread to her lymph glands and liver, along with other parts of her body. There was concern it might have reached her head, and the mention of the MRI was distressing. Tearfully, she expressed, "Oh God, I don't want to die, Jeff. I don't. I love you." Regretfully, she admitted, "I wasted all that time with Marie and caused our troubles when I should have gone in to see the doctor way back then. It's my fault. I ignored some of the symptoms. It spread. I wanted to be there for Marie since I thought she needed me. It's too late now. I only have a few months. I am so sorry, Jeff." I expressed, "Brenda, I'm the one that's sorry. What can I do for you? What can we do?" She replied, "Just hold me, Jeff. Love me and hold me. That's all anyone can do for me now." I followed her request, holding her close. Forgotten were those days of anger and pain. We now faced new challenges, anger and pain brought by the dreaded cancer. Despite the time we were apart and Brenda had fallen, we had generally been a happy couple. I made an effort to maintain a positive and happy attitude around Brenda throughout the time she wasted away. At some point, we believed that some of the treatments might have been helping her, but later we discovered that was not the case. She outlasted the doctor's original estimate by a few months. Fortunately, she had her children and me by her side when she passed away. This is why I have issues with Marie. I question if I am being unfair, if I should forgive and forget. However, I find it difficult because Marie led my wife into a net of pain and suffering, causing us to lose precious time together, almost tearing us apart. Nearly a whole year was destroyed. A year that could have been spent loving each other, not struggling to overcome Brenda's one-night mistake. Additionally, there's the lingering question of whether that cancer could have been detected earlier. I don't know. I'll always wonder, though.
Story 4. Jerry Jacobson took pride in his practical nature and commitment to his work. His job often meant long stretches on the road, overseeing fencing contracts and designing farm structures, which frequently kept him away from home for days. These trips gave him time to think, and he appreciated the change of scenery. Yet they also stirred a lingering unease. He sensed an unsettling doubt about what he might come back to. Though he never voiced his concerns, something felt subtly wrong in his marriage to Shelley, as if an undercurrent of tension was quietly simmering. Over time, Jerry noticed Shelley's behavior changing. Once attentive, she was now distant, her actions increasingly evasive. The tension between them grew after years of unsuccessful attempts to start a family. While Jerry tried to dismiss it as ordinary stress, Shelley's insistence on installing a complicated alarm system struck him as odd, even obsessive. At first, he brushed it off, but a nagging suspicion started to take root in his mind. Sneaking into his own house undetected wasn't hard for Jerry. He just had to circle around back, enter through the basement, and avoid triggering the system Shelley had pressed him to install. Entering from the front wasn't an option. The alarm would go off instantly. Shelley had been adamant about extra security, so much so that Jerry finally gave in and set up the system. The alarm even covered the garage door, a detail Shelley had specifically requested. She insisted on a 10-second delay on the keypad. 45 seconds is ridiculous. A thief could make it to my bedroom before the alarm kicks in, she had argued. You just want to give your boyfriend time to jump out the window, Jerry joked. Shelley just laughed and continued making dinner, but her logic was convincing enough that he reset the delay. Of course, this meant he'd trigger the alarm each time he returned home, but it would only last a few seconds until he entered the 4-digit code. You check it every day to make sure it works, Shelley teased him one afternoon as he walked in, annoyed after disabling it about 24 times. He knew all the windows were secure too, but he also knew no one would notice the wire he ran along the top of the door frame, bypassing the sensor. Shelley rarely ventured to the basement, and even if she did, Jerry doubted she'd see it. When he tested the setup, the panel lit up perfectly and the cables held steady. The door made no noise. The hinges, which he'd oiled, moved smoothly. He'd reinforced each step of the stairs himself nearly a week earlier. Shelley was actually pleased about the stairs. She had been asking him for months to fix their creaky state. He'd tested their strength with his full weight and smiled to himself. No sound at all. His small .22 caliber high-standard pistol, stashed in his windbreaker on hooks at the top of the stairs, held 9 rounds. It felt oddly reassuring to reach into his pocket and feel it right where he left it. Jerry had no intention of using it unless absolutely necessary. But he wasn't going to back down either. Something was off, and he was determined to get to the bottom of it. There was no sense in confronting Shelley. If something was happening, she'd deny it, and if not, he'd look foolish. He was troubled by the 3 years they'd spent trying to conceive without success. He had even seen a doctor who'd humorously assured him he was more than fertile. The doctor had chuckled, slapped Jerry on the shoulder, and urged him to just go home. It was Shelley's turn, yet she'd chosen her own doctor, the one she'd been seeing since before their marriage. She insisted on it. One day, by coincidence, Jerry spotted her leaving the hair salon. She was supposed to be at her doctor's appointment, but instead she was getting her hair and nails done. Jerry didn't think much of it at the time, already late for work, until the thought lingered as he parked in his garage. This was just last month. That evening, she'd told him, looking sorrowful, that while she could potentially have children, it was unlikely. She'd even shed quiet tears. He held her as she calmed down, but a sick feeling settled in his stomach. "We can just keep trying, honey," she murmured, but her tone didn't feel quite right. Not entirely honest. That's when Jerry began paying closer attention. He doubted the hairdresser, a woman who he saw as far removed from medical expertise, was offering Shelley the guidance she needed on such matters. Treason? No way. It couldn't be. Shelley was always at home. Always. No hints, not a single one. Whenever he came back, she was there. Sure, he had to go on overnight trips a few times a month, but that was normal. Could it be pills? He wondered. Was she hiding independence? But that too seemed impossible. She looked healthy, even carrying an extra pound or two on her rounded figure. Maybe gambling. She could be playing at Indian casinos, but a quick check of her finances showed nothing unusual. Shelley was generally frugal, aside from clothes, the occasional $50 salon visit, and keeping her nails done. But her nails always looked well kept. This was the part he never quite understood. He'd heard her complain, "Damn, I broke my nail," at least 50 times. Later that night, while Shelley was in the shower, Jerry searched her drawers and looked in her closet. Shelley loved beautiful clothes. She had outfits he'd never seen. One dresser drawer held a little bag of underwear that he couldn't recall her wearing before, but that wasn't unusual. When they went out to dinner or dancing, she would often surprise him with stunning outfits and skimpy underwear. Jerry enjoyed how Shelley would model her looks, delighting in his reactions. She could certainly turn heads, and she knew it. He almost wished it wasn't Saturday night. Dancing with her made him feel proud, and afterward he'd have the pleasure of discovering what she was wearing underneath. Then he found birth control pills. His heart pounded, and he barely composed himself before she finished showering. His first impulse was to confront her, but he reminded himself to look into things more closely. Years earlier, he'd made a mistake with Dana, his then-girlfriend. He had planned to propose, and it seemed she'd been thinking about it too. They'd even met each other's families. But one night at a party, he saw her passionately kiss another man, pressing close to him. Shocked, he watched as she greeted him. Jerry had stormed over and knocked the guy flat. Only then did he learn it was her brother back from college for the weekend. Dana had wanted to surprise him with her brother's visit, which had gone terribly wrong. She didn't answer his calls after that night. Jerry had barely reached second base with Dana, but she'd hinted that things were about to change. That very evening, she'd even slipped a packet of protection into his shirt pocket with a mischievous smile. But his attack on her brother in front of everyone ruined it all. Thinking before acting was a lesson he'd learned well. Jerry's work involved ordering and designing farm fences, sheds, and paddocks. He created pens to help farmers manage their livestock for auctions or medical care. It was a rewarding job, allowing him to meet good people and work outdoors. His last assignment had been particularly rewarding. Not only did he sell nearly 4 miles of fencing, but the family invited him to dinner. Ham and cornbread with black beans, homemade, not from a box. Sam Martin, a rugged old man, was tall and lean, often seen in faded red long johns under his unbuttoned work shirt, held by suspenders. His wife, Dottie, was cheerful and plump, always smiling. By day's end, after riding across the ranch on Honda ATVs, Sam and Jerry had become close. Both shared a love of hunting and fishing, and Sam felt almost like the father figure Jerry had never had. It was remarkable how two men could bond so quickly over a day's conversation, but that's what happened. Sam and Dottie had a daughter, Molly, around 19, and quite attractive. Even in a flannel shirt and jeans, she was undeniably a beautiful young woman. She seemed interested in Jerry, though he was married, so it wouldn't go anywhere. Yet her image lingered in his mind the next day on the drive home. Good people, Jerry thought, the kind you'd want to know better. Their ranch was blessed with hills and good water, and Sam had been raising his herds there for years. But with new neighbors moving in, unhappy with cattle roaming on their lawns, fences had become a necessity. Sam faced a choice: fence his land or let development overrun it. He chose to build. This had been one of Jerry's biggest sales. The downside of Jerry's job was the distance. Many large farms were hundreds of miles from home. For this last trip, he'd gone over 350 miles into Idaho. His company paid for his motels and meals, so rather than driving back the same day, Jerry usually stayed overnight and returned home the following day. This time felt different. Sam and Dottie insisted he stay the night, showing him to the spacious bedroom upstairs. It was so quiet there that Jerry had trouble falling asleep. Now and then, he heard sheep or cows, each sound jolting him awake. Around 2 a.m., he tossed the blanket aside as the warm night settled in. He got up to use the bathroom and, on his way down the hall, passed another bedroom with a partially open door. A soft nightlight glowed inside. Molly lay atop the blanket, undressed. Her lower body was in shadow, but one bare bosom was highlighted in the faint light. She looked to be asleep, and the scene was intensely sensual. Jerry acknowledged her beauty, but quickly looked away. It wasn't right to linger. Returning to his room, he noticed her door was now closed. A flush rose to his face. She must have caught him peeking. The next morning, Sam and Dottie invited him to the kitchen, where heaps of eggs, ham, and potatoes awaited, better than anything he'd ever tasted. "We grow it all ourselves, 16 acres on the North Ridge just for potatoes," Sam said, noticing Jerry's smile as he took a second helping. Molly strolled in then, looking around sleepily and yawning. She wore jeans and a flannel shirt, looking incredible. She gave Jerry a sly glance, raising one eyebrow in a playful way that made him blush. Dottie noticed, glancing between them with a grin. "More coffee, Jerry?" she asked. Jerry nodded, feeling a little out of place, but grateful for the warm hospitality. After breakfast, he packed his things, placing the signed contract and a generous check into his briefcase. It was time to head back to his own life. He thought he could live happily like Sam and Dottie. As he climbed into his truck, Dottie handed him a loaf of homemade cornbread, which he looked forward to eating on the long drive. Molly stood on the porch, holding the railing with one hand. Jerry waved as he started the truck, and she waved back. On the drive home, he couldn't stop thinking about her, trying to push the thought away, but the image of her lying there undressed kept flashing in his mind. Shelley kept their home spotless and was always there to greet him with hugs when he returned. His trips rarely lasted more than a night, and he loved coming home. But oddly, after these trips, Shelley always seemed extra affectionate. At 28, she was in great shape, her blonde hair and a short updo. She was well-built, especially up top, and worked in real estate commission sales. Her work wasn't bad either. Occasionally, she made more than he did, though that was rare, and in recent years, she sometimes went a month or two without sales. Despite this, Jerry knew he could use a new truck. His old Dodge Ram still looked good, but was showing signs of wear. He held off on replacing it, as it was fully paid off. Their bed life was good. He came home a couple of times a week, and Shelley was always thrilled. He felt their life together was solid. Sure, there were some things he'd like to improve, but he made the best of it. His last trip ended like the others, Shelley waiting, ready for love time. Minutes later, they were in bed, the sheets crisp and clean as they always were when he came home. Despite the lingering suspicion in the back of his mind, Jerry managed well. When focused on work, his mind was on numbers and plans, not these suspicions. He had nothing concrete to go on. Maybe Shelley had gone to both the doctor and the salon that day. New clothes, fancy underwear, she could have been planning a surprise for him, as she sometimes did, coming out dressed to impress for a nice dinner, doing a little twirl to show off a new dress or a tiny strip with a grin. But the suspicion wouldn't leave him. He had to find the truth. Birth control pills meant she'd lied to him, and it bothered him that she might not just be avoiding having kids. He made changes to figure things out, adjustments she didn't even notice. The night things unraveled, Jerry drove past his house, scanning for an unfamiliar car. There was none, which he expected, given the nearby neighbors. Upstairs, the light was on, the curtains tightly drawn. He felt a dull ache, holding the pack of birth control pills he'd found in her underwear drawer. Seeing her at the salon instead of the doctor's had been a shock, and that's where all this started. "If you smell a rat, it's close by," his mom had said 100 times. Jerry sensed it at the top of the stairs. He listened, only hearing the shower running. A strange sound at nearly 2 a.m. He'd expected her to be asleep or maybe catch her doing something else. Since he'd told her he was in Idaho, she thought he couldn't be home until late the next day. There was even a good gig in Idaho. He'd arranged a sale over the phone. Sam and Dottie, pleased with his first job, had asked him back for more. Though he was invited, he still had to compete in a small auction for another project nearby. He briefly thought he might enjoy it. Maybe he'd get some more cornbread. And maybe he'd even see Molly again. Jerry shook his head, trying to clear his mind. He wasn't himself, letting strange thoughts slip in. Here he was, standing at the top of his own stairs, tool in hand, thinking about work and a woman he barely knew. Part of him wanted to turn around and slip back out of the house, but he needed to know. If Shelley wasn't doing anything wrong, he could leave unnoticed and forget this ever happened. But what if she was? Jerry didn't know what he'd do if there was someone with her. The thought of an affair twisted in his mind, nagging at him with a sad certainty. He felt foolish as he stood there, listening. All he heard was the shower running. Shelley often took long showers, so that wasn't unusual. Finally, he pushed the door open slightly, not expecting much. A man sat on the edge of the disheveled bed with his back to the door, fully dressed, reading Popular Science, Jerry's magazine. Jerry's vision reddened. The shower was still on. The man turned a page. "Who the hell are you?" Jerry demanded, stepping into the room. The man jolted and looked at Jerry in shock. It was Art Barnes, the local bank manager Shelley worked with on her real estate deals. Art was around 50, gray at the temples, and a big guy, bigger than Jerry. Jerry knew Barnes had his hands in every major deal in town, and suspected he'd put up a tough fight if things turned physical. "Wait, it's not what it looks like," Barnes stammered, then saw the tool in Jerry's hand, his eyes going wide. "You came to my house to be with my wife in my own damn bed?" Jerry growled. "Buddy, it's not—" Barnes didn't get to finish. Jerry lifted the tool, and Barnes threw the magazine aside, lunging at him. The sudden aggression took Jerry by surprise. He'd expected Barnes to back off. Barnes might have reached him before he could fire, but he had to come around the bed. Jerry shot him twice. Barnes fell, groaning. "What's going on?" Shelley's scream cut through the room as she burst from the bathroom, dripping wet and completely undressed. "Who is this? What's he doing here?" Jerry shouted. Her hand flew to her mouth as she looked down at Barnes writhing on the floor. "Jerry, it's not what it seems," she said, looking panicked. "Oh my God! You were getting ready for him!" Jerry shouted, his anger exploding. "No, honey, we were just going to talk, that's all," she whimpered. "At 2 a.m.? In our bed? Undressed? I just wanted a shower. Nothing happened." Her eyes filled with dread. "You lying witch!" he screamed, his fury boiling over. Jerry shot her too. Shelley reacted like a scene out of a movie, screaming as she fell. Jerry watched her for a moment. It all felt surreal, as if he were watching someone else's life unfold on a screen. He turned to Barnes, who lay on the floor, moaning and staring up at him in terror. "Please, don't liquidate me," Barnes begged. For a split second, Jerry considered putting a bullet in his head, but decided against it. "Fool," he muttered, delivering a hard punch to Barnes's face. Barnes went silent. Suddenly, a cold calm settled over Jerry, as if he were outside himself, watching the scene unfold. He approached Shelley, who was crying and writhing. "Was it worth it?" he asked. Shelley just stared at him, her eyes wide with fear. "Forget it," he muttered, then went to the nightstand and picked up the phone. "I found an intruder in my wife's bedroom and shot him. My wife was hurt in the struggle." "Send an ambulance," he said, his tone steady. Then he tucked the tool into his waistband and headed downstairs. In the fridge, he found his usual 6-pack of beer. On the counter sat an unopened bag of chips and a jar of mixed nuts, snacks Shelley knew he liked. Jerry grabbed them and went to the living room, sitting in a spot where he could see the base of the stairs. He thought about the job he'd just won, running the numbers in his head. The tool dug into his side, so he shifted it to a more comfortable spot. Shelley's sobbing drifted down from upstairs, and he reached over to turn on the TV. People were talking, but he couldn't follow what they were saying. The chips were fresh and tasty. By his second beer and halfway through the bag of chips, he finally heard the sirens. They sure aren't in a rush, he thought. On the way to the station, he was annoyed he hadn't been allowed to take his jar of nuts with him. They weren't exactly gentle with him either. They'd seen him sitting with the tool in his belt, so someone immediately pointed a weapon at him, yelling. One officer took the tool while Jerry was munching on a chip, only to be thrown down, arms twisted behind his back. "Ouch, that hurts," he muttered, but nobody replied. "Shut up," one of them growled. When he later asked for his jar of nuts, Jerry clammed up. "It doesn't look good," his new lawyer, Jack Ireland, told him. Jerry didn't know him. He'd never needed a lawyer before. Another inmate had recommended him. Mercer, McLaren, Hansen, Ireland, Phillips, the guy had listed. Jerry figured he'd spent enough time talking to lawyers. "I used Jack Ireland. He's solid," the guy boasted. "Then why are you still here?" Jerry asked, earning only a side eye. But he had to find someone, so he called Ireland. Jack Ireland was a short, stocky man with a battered briefcase. He reviewed the charges and shook his head. "So, what's next?" Jerry asked, glancing nervously at Ireland. Ireland leaned back, folding his arms. "Bail hearing. We'll get it. You got enough home equity to cover it. After that, we wait for the grand jury to review the case." Jerry hesitated. "How serious is it?" "Attempted homicide," Ireland replied bluntly. He gave Jerry a hard look. "If you're going to shoot, make it count. As long as he's alive, he can testify against you. You're in deep now. And seriously, a .22? Should have gone with a Magnum," he added, a smirk creeping across his face. Jerry's voice wavered. "How bad off are they?" "No one's really told me much." Ireland sighed. "Your wife will be okay. Just a side wound. But Barnes, he's in rough shape. Those .22 rounds tend to fragment. He was in surgery for a while. Why'd you shoot him twice, anyway?" "He was still coming at me." "That second shot looks targeted. You strike below the belt," Ireland said with a side-eye. "Great," Jerry muttered, making the lawyer snicker. "A Magnum would have blown him off, but you just punched a hole between them," he said with another snort. Almost a month later, Jerry was finally out on bail, back in fresh air that felt strangely clean after so long in jail. He'd gotten used to the prison smell. He couldn't go home. The court order kept him 100 meters away from Shelley. She'd been discharged from the hospital long before he'd been freed, but he'd beaten her to signing the paperwork. Their home was titled in both their names, so either could sign off. A small legal detail, but it worked in his favor. He guessed Shelley missed it since she'd been in the hospital. Jack Ireland knew what he was doing and ensured he'd get paid. If Shelley wanted the house, she'd have to take on some of the bills. Jack Ireland had already secured a sizable deposit on his own apartment. Jerry was broke, having used his savings to hire Ireland, and he knew that was just the beginning. He figured this would infuriate Shelley, but he didn't care. His truck was parked down the street around the corner. He figured it was at least 100 meters away, as the order required, though he wasn't sure. A dozen parking tickets were stuck to the windshield, but it hadn't been towed. Jerry grabbed the tickets and tossed them. "What are they gonna do? Arrest me?" he muttered. At work, he checked in with his boss, who seemed on edge, and informed him they no longer needed him since he'd been unavailable, forcing them to hire a replacement. Jerry understood. He'd already seen the newspaper articles. That night, he slept in his truck, parked in a place called South Park. A bit of irony, he thought. The next day, he called Ireland, who arranged for a cop to escort him to pick up some of his things. Maybe Ireland wasn't so bad. Shelley was nowhere around. Jerry packed his clothes, tools, and his 2 Epiphone guitars. He grabbed his fishing gear and all 4 of his coin collections. He considered taking the big screen TV, but realized he had nowhere to plug it in. On his way out, he saw his jar of mixed nuts still on the shelf by the chair. He grinned, grabbing it. Peeking in the fridge, he considered taking the last 5 beers. But the cop gave him a look, so he left them behind. Stepping onto the porch, he discreetly changed the alarm system's access code right in front of the cop, who didn't notice. He chuckled at the small act of defiance. At a local store, he sold 2 guitars and most of his fishing rods, keeping just 1. After that, he had $100 left to his name. He stopped by the post office where he and Shelley rented a mailbox. Unsurprisingly, his key no longer worked. Shelley had changed it. Still, his mail was there. The clerk wasn't supposed to hand it over, there was a sign saying so. But Jerry looked her square in the eye, and she handed it over quickly, clearly uneasy. Inside were credit card offers and one for a funeral plan. Fitting, he thought. He rented a new box and filled out paperwork for the court to have his address. Part of him considered leaving town, but driving a huge yellow Dodge Ram, he knew he wouldn't be hard to find. 2 weeks later, Jerry was still jobless. His unsmiling face had been all over the news, painting him as an irrationally jealous husband who'd stormed into a business meeting and started shooting. He had an idea where this version came from. Art Barnes was a respected local businessman. He realized his lawyer was right. If he'd go through the trouble of shooting, he might as well have eliminated Barnes, or else this mess would haunt him. Back at South Park, his new home, he parked his truck in the bushes to hide it from the street. He took out his fishing rod, caught some grasshoppers, and snagged 6 small trout from a nearby stream. They were undersized, but he didn't care. "What are they going to do, find me?" he muttered, grilling them over a small fire. Jerry was washing his pan in the stream when his phone rang. "Jerry, hey man, need to talk to you," his old boss said, his tone unexpectedly friendly. Jerry frowned. "What now?" he thought. "Remember that fencing job you set up for Sam Martin in Idaho?" his boss asked. "Yeah," Jerry replied cautiously. "Well, he's got over 4,000 acres, wants fences, 2 barns, and a boundary up to the city limits. Biggest job we've ever had," his boss continued, sounding excited. Jerry's irritation flared. "What's that got to do with me?" "Martin insists on you," his boss explained. "Says he'll hire someone else if you're not in charge." Jerry smirked slightly. "Well, that's nice of him," he said, though he knew he technically wasn't allowed to leave the state. "So, what do you say?" his boss pressed, a note of hope in his voice. Jerry paused, then an idea struck him. "Maybe, what are you offering? How about double commissions?" his boss suggested. "Double?" Jerry repeated, surprised. "Yeah, and back to full-time work," his boss added. "And my salary?" Jerry pushed back. "I didn't even get a chance to explain when I was let go." The boss hesitated, and Jerry could practically hear him calculating. The job would pay 83 cents per half meter for miles of fencing, sheds, and other features, a substantial contract. "All right, agreed," his boss finally conceded. Jerry stopped by the corner store to celebrate with a jar of mixed nuts and a bottle of beer. Beer was off limits, but he didn't care, downing it fast and burying the bottle. At the hearing, the judge gave him a suspicious look, but ultimately granted him permission to cross state lines for work, provided he returned each night. "These charges are serious, Mr. Jacobson. Very serious," the judge said. "But I won't prevent you from working while we await trial. Don't mess this up or you'll be right back in jail. Understood?" "Yes, Your Honor," Jerry managed to say, keeping a straight face. The next day, he set off for Idaho. Sam greeted him warmly with a handshake. Apparently, the news hadn't reached him yet, and Jerry saw no reason to bring it up. "We're planting corn by the creek. South side's got good soil. Need the sheep kept out," Sam said. "Then there's the Angus. They're free range, but with construction popping up, I'm tired of the complaints. We want to keep them on our land." Jerry thought Sam must have a solid fortune by now. By the time they got back to the house, it was nearly 8 p.m., and Jerry knew he had to head back to Oregon by midnight. He hated leaving behind a hot meal and the chance to see Molly, but he had no choice, so he left. Back in Oregon, he called his bail office and got only a voicemail. The next morning, he called as soon as they opened. "You don't have to call every day, just follow the rules, okay?" the person answering snapped. "Understood," Jerry replied, realizing they likely wouldn't be monitoring him unless something triggered their attention. He jumped back into his truck and sped toward the Martin farm. As he pulled up, he noticed Molly sitting on the porch. The moment she saw him, she sprang up, ran inside, and came back moments later, now with a wide-brimmed hat and a basket. She wore cut-off jeans and a t-shirt, her lively steps making it clear she wasn't wearing a bra. "Let's go," she said, climbing into the truck. "Where to?" he asked, starting the engine. "Dad wants me to show you the area by the building site for measurements," she explained. "Everyone else is busy cutting hair today." "Cutting hair?" he repeated, confused. "Yes," she laughed. "The sheep. They'll be at it until dark." It took them over an hour to reach the area. Cattle grazed nearby, unconcerned by their presence. They chatted along the way about all sorts of things, and Jerry couldn't help glancing at her, noticing how her chest moved when they hit bumps. They drove across open fields with only faint ATV tracks as a guide. He thought briefly about how long it had been since he'd been with a woman, but pushed it aside. He was here for work and didn't want to upset her family. They came to a high ridge overlooking a river with a row of 3-story buildings about half a mile away. He noticed a busy highway in the distance. Progress, he thought, noticing the mix of nature and modern development. He saw the problem right away. Grazing animals near a residential area would cause issues. "The fence needs to go about 50 feet from those buildings and run to the city limits. Thankfully, we own the riverbanks on both sides," he said, half to himself and half to Molly. Switching to 4-wheel drive, he drove along the fence line, using the speedometer to calculate distance. Once back at the main house, he sat down to calculate the measurements. This project would take the entire crew weeks to complete. As Jerry finished up, he looked up to see Molly sitting cross-legged nearby, swinging one leg and letting her shoe dangle. "Everyone's still down at the lower barn," Molly said with a grin. "They won't be back for a while. Want to go upstairs?" Jerry felt his face flush at her boldness. I can't," he stammered. "I'm married. Well, we're separated, but I barely know you." Molly glanced at his hand, surprised. "Oh, I didn't know. You're not wearing a ring. Are you getting divorced?" "Most likely. Actually, yeah, I'm certain." Her curiosity was piqued. "So, you didn't get along? What happened?" Jerry hesitated, then admitted, "Well, I shot her." Molly's eyebrows shot up. "You what?" "I shot her and her lover. They were at my house, in my bed." "Oh, I see," Molly replied, clearly taken aback but managing not to look visibly shocked. "I guess I can't blame you. Did they survive?" "Yeah," Jerry replied quietly. "Well, that's something," she said with a small smile. "Sounds like you've got a lot going on." Jerry nodded, deciding to tell her the full story. She listened closely, taking it all in. When he finished, Molly looked thoughtful. "So that's why you had to rush back to Oregon last night?" "Yeah, for the trial. I'll probably end up in prison," he said, looking down. Molly studied him for a moment. "Maybe not," she replied softly. "What if I came with you?" "With me?" Jerry asked, caught off guard. "Yes, to Oregon. I'm not afraid of you, Jerry. You seem like a good man, the only one I've felt this way about. I love it here, but sometimes I feel isolated. Most of the men around here are either too old or already taken." Jerry raised an eyebrow. "And your parents? Wouldn't they be upset if you just—" Molly chuckled. "Dad actually suggested I rope you in. Said you seemed like a good investment. He's never said that about anyone before. When I was dating someone else, he told me the guy wasn't worth it. I don't think he realizes you're still technically married, or he wouldn't have encouraged it. He's a bit old-fashioned." This is unexpected," Jerry said, trying to process her words. "I'm not exactly inexperienced, you know." I've only been with one guy, but I know what I want. And if we're together, I'd never betray you. I know what you're capable of if I did, she added with a playful laugh. Jerry didn't have to think long. What will we tell your parents? He asked. Oh, come on, she said, taking his hand and leading him toward the lower barn. Why explain anything? As they neared, they saw about a dozen men working with the sheep. Mr. Martin looked up, saw them holding hands, and grinned. Dad, Jerry and I are heading out. We'll be back by morning, okay? She called casually. All right, honey. Have fun, he replied with a knowing smile, then turned back to his work. Jerry blinked, still taken aback by her straightforwardness, but Molly just smiled. Dad and Mom are farmers. They know all about life. Zex, love, it's all part of it, she laughed, amused at his reaction. Jerry wasn't sure what to say. He'd never met anyone like her, and she clearly wanted to be with him, without hesitation or judgment. On the way to the motel, Jerry managed to mostly stay within the speed limit, though it was hard with Molly sitting beside him, her shirt slipping off her shoulders. As soon as they hit the open highway, she pulled her t-shirt over her head. His first impression had been right. She was stunning. He even started slowing down, but Molly stopped him. The first time should be in bed. By the time we get there, you'll be ready, she teased, running her hand down his leg. At one point, he asked her to put her shirt back on because he couldn't focus on driving. A trucker noticed her and honked, and she laughed, saying, I'm making his day. Jerry muttered, God help me, under his breath. After a few more miles, he asked her to cover up before she caused an accident, and she obligingly put her shirt back on. They arrived at the motel in record time. When they entered the room, Molly still had her shirt on, but as soon as the door closed, she tossed it aside. Jerry, used to making love with Shelley, found this was different. Molly didn't just want him. She needed him, practically pulling him toward her before he even had his pants off. Her body was slimmer in the waist and hips, with firm, youthful curves, and they spent most of the night exploring each other. Around 11 the next morning, while she was on the phone with her father, Jerry asked, What did he say? He just laughed, she said, crawling back onto the bed. They spent the rest of the day absorbed in each other. By that evening, Jerry realized he was in love with her. He barely knew her, but that didn't matter. He wanted her. Over dinner at a small local cafe, he told her. So, you're saying it's just us? She asked, her expression serious. Yes, I want you to be mine, he said, feeling it completely. Wow, she replied, looking shy for the first time. Honestly, I thought you just wanted some fun. Dad thinks you're a good choice. That's how he sees things, she added with a smile. Jerry was a bit surprised, but she laughed it off. You're wonderful. But where will we live? She asked, turning serious again. I don't know, he admitted, realizing he hadn't thought that far ahead. Well, you've got a job and a truck. That's enough to start. Let's just see what happens. If I commit, it'll be forever, she said with a warm smile. Molly, I'm falling in love with you, he told her. Not now, she replied gently but firmly. I like being with you, but I'm not sure yet. Relax, Jerry. For now, no one will touch me but you. And if I decide this isn't for me, you won't touch me again. Deal? Deal, he agreed, his face serious. She was right. They needed time. All right, now let's get back to the motel, she said with a grin. The next day, Jerry finished his measurements and contracts and met with Sam and Dottie to review the plans. They made a few small changes, Sam signed, and shook Jerry's hand. A few minutes later, Molly came out with 2 suitcases. Her parents looked at her in surprise, then at Jerry. I'm going with Jerry, she said firmly. For the first time, Jerry saw the smile disappear from Dottie's face, though she hid it quickly. Sam stood, hugged Molly, and turned to Jerry, his expression more serious than Jerry had ever seen. You've got a lot on your plate, son. You need to settle it, he said firmly. At that moment, Jerry realized Sam knew more than he'd let on. Jerry nodded, taking his words to heart. Molly's not going anywhere, Sam continued. You need to settle things with your wife first. There's no way you two can start a life otherwise. Jerry knew he was right. He saw Molly's shoulders slump. She was so young and impulsive, but her father's wisdom clearly sank in. After dinner, Jerry shook hands with everyone and hugged Molly for a long time. I'll be back as soon as I can, he promised. It's all right, Jerry. I'll wait. I need to know too, she said, tears in her eyes as he climbed into his truck. The drive back felt endless. Jerry didn't want to return now. He knew exactly where he wanted to be. The legal process was dragging on, and there were moments when he almost forgot what he faced. Work didn't fully distract him. On weekends, he made the long drive to see Molly. Sam and Dottie welcomed him, indifferent to the fact that he and Molly retreated to her room for the night. After a few weeks, he felt almost part of the family. He'd even put on some weight, hard to avoid with Dottie's cooking. Every lunch was a feast. He learned that Molly, a quick learner, was becoming a good cook herself. She was also a natural on the ranch. Once he watched her handle a large calf that had injured itself and was panicking. As it thrashed, he grabbed its tail, only to be dragged around while Molly laughed at his clumsy attempts. He managed to slow it down, and Molly ducked under its tail, grabbed its front leg, and used her weight to wrestle it to the ground. She quickly tied its hind legs with rope, and the calf, now subdued, let out a defeated bleat. Then its mother charged toward them, furious. Jerry instinctively prepared to run, but Molly stood her ground, so he stayed too. Molly tossed Jerry a flimsy stick, and he hesitated, wondering what he was supposed to do with it. The cow lowered her head, snorting and kicking up dirt with her hooves. Molly calmly poked her in the face with the stick, stopping her in her tracks. Jerry did the same when the cow turned toward him. Together they drove the cow away, shut the gate, and went back to the calf. Molly expertly stitched up a cut on its shoulder blade. It looked like it had snagged on a wire. She applied some ointment from her ATV and let the calf go. It stood for a moment, head down and mouth drooling. Once they opened the gate, the cow rushed over, immediately starting to nurse her calf. "Well, it'll be fine," Molly said with a grin. "That cow wanted to liquidate me," Jerry muttered. "Yeah, but she was just protecting her calf. Cows are easy to manage. They're actually pretty dumb. It's the sheep that give us all the trouble," she laughed. Jerry had already seen some of the sheep. He inspected a hole in the fence a bit more closely, then widened it just enough for the animals to crawl through. Within moments, the entire flock had slipped to the other side. When he helped herd them back into the pen, there was a chute inside the barn where they lined up for shearing, one by one. As soon as all the sheep were in, Jerry locked the gate. He walked away, but one big sheep came over, inspected the latch, lifted her nose, and tossed it back, swinging the gate wide open. The whole flock streamed out into the open field again. The chaos stirred two border collies into action. They raced out, circled the flock, and froze, staring down the sheep. The flock paused, staring back, until one looked away. Instantly, the sheep turned and shuffled back into the pen. Molly walked over, set the latch, then pulled the chain bolt up and secured it. "They know all the tricks," she laughed. Jerry looked at the two dogs and could have sworn they were giving him a disapproving look. This routine continued for weeks as he traveled to the ranch and helped with various chores. Sam and Dottie kept an eye on him, and he knew it, but he enjoyed the work. For a time, he almost forgot his real-world troubles, immersed in this life so different from his own. Reality hit each time he unlocked the door to his tiny apartment back in town. One day, his phone rang. He was surprised to hear Shelley's voice, since they hadn't been in contact. "How are you, Jerry?" she asked. He assumed she wanted to discuss their divorce, but there wasn't much left to say. She'd already been evicted from their house, which was now on the market. Jerry doubted it would sell quickly, and even if it did, there wasn't much money involved. "I'm fine. What do you want?" he replied. "I just wanted to thank you for not fighting me over alimony," she said. Jerry chuckled to himself. The court had ordered him to pay a hefty sum, and his lawyer had even hinted that it might have been less if he hadn't gone back to work. Shelley had put her job on hold to recover from her injuries, and Jerry knew she was milking it. Still, he'd paid up. He hadn't had a choice. "I also wanted you to know I forgive you," Shelley said suddenly. "What?" Jerry replied, caught off guard. "I forgive you. I know you were angry and didn't mean to hurt me," she continued. Jerry stared at her, incredulous. "You've got to be kidding me." "No, I'm serious," Shelley insisted. "I still love you. I was thinking, maybe we could go out for dinner and talk." Jerry recognized that familiar tone in her voice, a hint of her old persuasion tactics. After a pause, he shook his head. "That's not a good idea." "Of course it is. We can have a nice evening, just like before. I'll even wear something you like, maybe without anything underneath," she added seductively. "I miss you." Shelley's voice took on a sultry tone, clearly intended to provoke him. And it worked. "Shelley, you were the one who cheated on me. I'm not going on a date with you," Jerry snapped. "Oh, don't be like that. I'm just trying to make peace. I told you I forgive you. I know you didn't mean it," she replied. "Mean what? None of this is my fault. Honestly, I should have eliminated you both. And you forgive me?" Jerry's anger finally boiled over. Shelley's tone turned icy. "Art does things to me you couldn't even imagine." Then there was silence on the line, which only made his anger flare hotter. I should just come over and finish this mess, he shouted, seething. Just before the line went dead, he thought he heard a muffled sound in the background. What was that? He wondered, still simmering with rage. A short while later, 3 officers arrived, handcuffed him, and took him back to his cell. The situation felt absurd. His lawyer arrived, looking exasperated. Why did you threaten her? I didn't really threaten her, Jerry protested. She provoked me. She called and said she forgave me, the woman who cheated on me. She's insane. Well, they recorded you threatening her and Barnes, which violates the restraining order, his lawyer said firmly. But she called me, Jerry insisted. They're saying otherwise. They? Jerry's eyes narrowed. You mean Barnes was there too? Apparently, his lawyer confirmed. Jerry sighed, finally realizing that this was exactly the trap they'd set for him. His lawyer played a short recording. It was only Jerry's angry shouting after Shelley's pleasant invitation to dinner. They've edited this, Jerry told his lawyer, feeling despair settle over him. Maybe, but it doesn't look good, the lawyer replied. The old judge looked at Jerry with a scowl before shaking his head. Only a portion of the recording was presented in court. Shelley's voice sounded calm, as if she were genuinely seeking reconciliation, while Jerry's came across as furious and unhinged. This man is a danger to be left free, the prosecutor argued. It's clear this is a setup against my client, Jerry's lawyer countered. He suffered immensely. His wife cheated on him with Mr. Barnes, and they're using this against him out of spite. But your client made the threat, the judge responded simply, and there's no proof of an affair either. Jerry was back in a cell. Days turned into weeks, then a month. His lawyer visited a few times to provide updates. Then one day, a young woman introduced herself as Carrie Anderson, a lawyer. I don't think I can afford another attorney, Jerry said, defeated. Lucky for you, you have friends. I'm taking this on pro bono, and there's a team helping, she said with a smile. Friends? Jerry asked, confused. Yes, Sam Martin and his wife. Oh, and a message for you. A good breeding bull, she added, amused. Jerry chuckled, finally understanding. Art Barnes might have power in his town, but he couldn't control everyone. Soon, they gathered hard proof that the tape had been altered. Tracing Jerry's cell records showed that the call had come from Art Barnes's office. Just 3 days later, Jerry was released on bail. The first thing he did was pick up his truck and head to Idaho. Molly ran to him, nearly knocking him over with a hug. Sam and Dottie stood on the porch, smiling. Thank you both. But why did you do this for me? He asked. Not for you, Molly, Sam grinned. That night, Jerry told them the whole story, something he hadn't done before, though Molly already knew bits and pieces. As they listened, Jerry felt a peace settle over him. That night, lying beside Molly, holding her close, he felt at home. I'm ready, she whispered. Jerry smiled, knowing Molly was truly his. A month later, the trial began. The judge was different, older, but just as stern. Things went as Jerry expected. Both Barnes and Shelley testified that they'd been having a routine business meeting, with Shelley stepping into her private bathroom to freshen up after a long day. They claimed Jerry stormed in and started shooting, but Jerry's team pointed out that this took place at 2 a.m. in Shelley's bedroom. The prosecution even showed a diagram with Barnes sitting on the bed, reading. Jerry's team argued that, as far as Jerry knew, Barnes could have been a robber or even a carnivore. The jury exchanged glances. When Shelley testified again, she continued to deny any affair. Then photos surfaced showing her and Barnes in compromising situations. Jerry had seen these pictures before, taken by a reputable detective after both had left the hospital. In the images, Barnes, who had been shot in the groin, seemed to be recovering quite well. Shelley's composure shattered as the photos were displayed. Art Barnes's wife stood up yelling, "You fool!" before storming out, leaving Barnes looking miserable. Objection! The prosecution tried, but the judge remained indifferent. More photos displayed the crime scene. The disheveled bed, a magazine lying next to Shelley. During a break, Carrie leaned in and confided to Jerry that the case was nearly wrapped up, except for one sticking point. What's that? Jerry asked quietly. You shot your wife, Carrie replied. Barnes was self-defense, but shooting her is harder to justify. So, what's the plan? We could argue it was a crime of passion, an uncontrollable fit of rage, but temporary insanity isn't an option at this point. Jerry considered this. What if I just tell the truth? Carrie raised an eyebrow. And what would you say? She drove me crazy, he admitted. That could lead to an attack charge, Carrie warned. You understand that? Yes, Jerry replied firmly. But it's the truth. When the verdict was read, the foreman announced, "Not guilty on the first charge. Guilty." The courtroom fell silent as Jerry noticed Barnes and Shelley's absence. The judge sighed, looking at him. "Son, you can't just go around shooting people, no matter how justified you feel," he said, shaking his head. "At least no one died. That's something." Laughter rippled through the room. "Order," the judge said, banging his gavel. 5 years with time served and probation." He stood, leaving without a glance back. Jerry hugged Carrie and looked over to see Molly, smiling through her tears. Outside, the sun was shining as he walked out, hand in hand with her. A few days later, at the final divorce hearing, Shelley was absent, and her alimony claim was dropped. As they left, the sun was shining brightly. Driving back to Idaho in his big Dodge, Molly leaned back, her blouse unbuttoned, soaking up the morning light. "There's a truck nearby," Jerry warned, glancing over his shoulder. "I don't care. Let him look if he wants to," Molly laughed, enjoying the sunshine. "You don't mind, do you?" They continued driving, a long incline gradually blocking the trucker's view. "So what about a wedding?" Molly asked suddenly. Jerry shrugged. "I don't mind. Do you want to?" "Of course I do," she teased. "Besides, you should want it too." "Oh yeah? And why's that?" "We didn't exactly use any protection," she replied with a mischievous grin. Jerry's eyes widened. "Wait, is that what you meant when you said you were ready?" "Yes, that's what I meant," she replied, laughing. "Any objections?" "My dad has a tool, you know," she joked, her eyes sparkling. "He won't need it," Jerry said, grinning back. When they returned to the ranch, Molly turned to him. "Let's head down to the stream." "What for?" he asked, curious. "So I can give you a proper homecoming," she winked. Sam and Dottie waved as they headed down the hill toward the creek. By the grassy bank, she slipped out of her clothes, and they shared a tender embrace, listening to the birds and the gentle flow of the stream. As they lay together, they heard a distant bull's bellow. Jerry tilted his head back and mimicked the sound. Molly laughed. "You've got a lot of practice to do." "Maybe somewhere else?" he asked, smiling. "You're perfect," she whispered. Laughing, they dressed and walked back to the house. For the first time, Jerry felt he was truly home. Jerry Jacobson's life took on a slower, steadier rhythm at the Martin Ranch. In the months following his trial, he fully immersed himself in the work and routine of ranch life. The vast Idaho fields provided him with an unexpected kind of peace, a sanctuary of open skies and winding creeks, far from the troubles he left behind. Each morning he rose before dawn, feeling the cool, crisp air as he worked alongside Sam and the others. The work was hard but satisfying, his hands shaping new fences, corrals, and sheds, as if each hammer's strike was building the life he'd long sought but never truly found. Molly was always by his side. Over time, her gentle humor and unwavering support reminded him of what it meant to share life with someone who was his equal in spirit. Her laughter, ringing across the fields, was often the last sound he heard before he closed his eyes each night. Together, they developed a rhythm. Mornings filled with work, afternoons with laughter, and evenings often spent stargazing, wrapped in each other's embrace. The small shared moments became a reminder that love didn't have to be a storm of intensity. It could be the gentle presence of someone who stood by you, even when life went sideways. Jerry was learning that love wasn't always flashy or new, but something that settled into your bones and made you feel whole. Eventually, the memory of his past life faded, replaced by the countless tasks and simple pleasures of ranch work. But Jerry kept close to Sam's words, "Take care of what's real." That became his new motto. He learned to let go of the bitterness that once consumed him, and with Molly's steadfast presence, he found a sense of peace that had once seemed unreachable. One autumn evening, as they were bringing in the last of the cattle, Molly turned to him, her eyes bright with excitement. "Do you ever think we'll have our own ranch, Jerry?" she asked, her voice soft but full of hope. Jerry paused, considering the life they were building together. "I think we will," he replied, smiling at her. "One day we'll make our own little piece of paradise." He looked at her, feeling the warmth of a promise that needed no words. As the years passed, Jerry's life with Molly blossomed in unexpected ways. The Jacobsons became a beloved part of the community, known for their hospitality, resilience, and commitment to family and friends. And though Jerry's journey had been marked by hardship, he now knew that he had found his way home. In the quiet moments, he would sometimes think back to the man he once was, the anger and suspicion that had fueled his actions, and he felt grateful that he had left that man behind. The future stretched out before him, as open as the Idaho skies, filled with endless possibilities. A future shaped by the work of his hands, the strength of his heart, and the enduring love that had, against all odds, given him a second chance.